In the digital age, data plays a huge role in our everyday lives. It's present in lots of obvious ways, when we're shopping online, for example, and have to type in our name and address. But data collection can also be less visible. Take data brokers, for example. You've probably never heard of them, but these businesses specialize in creating in-depth profiles of individuals for advertisers. A single profile might draw on up to 1,500 data points. This can include a person's sexuality, browsing history, political affiliation, and even medical records. One US-based data broker, Axiom, claims to have files on 10% of the world's population. It's not just businesses, of course. In 2013, Edward Snowden uncovered a vast regime of mass government surveillance programs, opening a global conversation which is still unfolding today. In this video, we'll take a closer look at this debate, focusing on the related but distinct concepts of privacy and data protection. By the end, you should have a clear idea of how these issues differ and overlap, how both are affected by the digital age, and how you can engage with companies and governments to protect and strengthen these rights. So what are we talking about when we say privacy and data protection? Let's take privacy first. Article 12 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights treats privacy as a distinct human right. It says that no one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence. Everyone has the right to the protection of the law against such interference or attacks. This is simple enough. Agreeing on what privacy actually means here has proved harder. Depending on the context, it can mean the right to freedom of thought and conscience, the right to be left alone, the right to control one's own body, the right to protect your reputation, the right to a family life, or the right to a sexuality of your own definition. There are other ambiguities. In legal terms, privacy isn't an absolute right. This means it can be restricted for certain reasons, for example, to protect national security or public safety, or if it conflicts with other rights, like the right to free expression. An example could be a public figure invoking privacy to avoid disclosing their financial records. And what about data protection? Contrary to popular belief, it is not the same thing as privacy. Privacy is a broad concept referring to the conditions which enable a basic foundation of human dignity and autonomy. Data protection is more specific. It's concerned with the ways third parties handle the information they hold about us, how it is collected, processed, shared, stored, and used. In other words, privacy is the big picture and data protection is one corner of it. Like privacy, data protection is also subject to limits. For example, when a warrant is obtained allowing law enforcement to access the phone records of a suspect. And while data protection is in some ways more clearly defined than privacy, how it is applied legally can still vary greatly depending on which country you're in. The digital age has created new ways to collect, access, analyze, and use data, often across multiple borders and jurisdictions. Unsurprisingly, this poses challenges for human rights. One challenge relates to the way companies use our data. The Internet's business model depends on people sharing their personal data in exchange for access to content, services, and social media platforms. While you might not pay anything upfront to go on Facebook, they still make money from you by selling your personal information to advertisers. By clicking Agree to Terms of Service, users technically consent to this model. But in practice, virtually no one actually reads them. This is a problem because no one knows what they're really signing up to, which creates opportunities for misuse. Another challenge relates to the collection of personal data by governments. Technological developments now enable governments to monitor our conversations, transactions, and the locations we visit. In some countries, including Russia, Brazil, Australia, and South Korea, companies are legally required to store this data locally for long periods of time, making it easier for governments to get information on their citizens. These measures are often introduced in the name of fighting cybercrime and terrorism. But without adequate protections, this data can easily be abused to target dissidents and activists. undermining freedom of expression and the rights to association and assembly. And these are just the technologies we have now. Emerging technologies like the Internet of Things, wearables, and artificial intelligence are likely to pose new challenges to human rights. As human rights defenders, we need to be prepared for these. There are many bodies and forums where privacy and data protection issues are discussed and defined. National and regional courts have a crucial role here. The European Court of Human Rights, for example, has imposed limits on stop and search practices by the police and on the amount of time data can be legally retained. At the national level, it's common to find a specific public body responsible for privacy and data protection. This can be a specialist post or an ombudsman. But the extent to which privacy is defined and protected varies greatly between different jurisdictions. For example, there is no clear right to privacy in the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. However, there are mechanisms at the international level. Following a UN resolution on the right to privacy in the digital age, the Human Rights Council has established a new special rapporteur for privacy, and various Internet policy forums like the Internet Governance Forum, the Council of Europe, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and conferences like HOPE and Sci-Fi also contribute to shaping the scope of privacy in the digital age. And finally, we have companies. The decisions of companies can also have a huge impact on data protection and privacy rights. For example, by building end-to-end encryption into their software, as WhatsApp did in early 2016. Let's look at two examples of privacy and data protection in the real world. First, let's look at the Apple versus FBI case. After the 2016 terrorist attacks in the US city of San Bernardino, the FBI asked Apple for the information stored on the iPhone of one of the suspects. However, Apple's operating system is encrypted and only accessible through a PIN code. The FBI asked Apple to modify the system to let them in. Apple refused, opening a lively debate on the right to privacy versus security needs. The case was almost taken to court, but in the end, the FBI found a vulnerability to crack the phone. In privacy terms, this was a legal setback. If the case had gone to court, it could have helped popularize the risks of weakening encryption for society and establish what is a legitimate limitation on privacy by the state. Next, let's look at surveillance in Kenya. In Kenya, a combination of invasive surveillance measures and a lack of adequate data protection facilitated a crackdown on civil society in 2013, which was documented by Peace Brigades International. Many human rights defenders had their offices raided, computers hacked, and phones tapped. Human rights defenders have been fighting back is by pushing for the ratification of Kenya's first data protection law, long stalled in Parliament. If implemented properly, this could limit the worst excesses of state surveillance. Kenya is by no means the only country to bring in surveillance legislation justified by security concerns. But this example is a good demonstration of how seemingly abstract restrictions on online privacy can have physical consequences in the offline world. So what can human rights defenders do to protect and strengthen privacy and data protection? An easy first step is taking digital security measures yourself. This can be as simple as using encryption and anonymity tools and encouraging your friends to do the same. Human rights defenders can also advocate for alternative digital business models, which aren't based on the extraction and sale of data. Economic pressure on the existing model is already growing. For example, over the last few years, the number of users using adblock software globally has exploded. There is evidence that this is already pushing companies to less invasive advertising practices. Engagement in debates at the national and regional level is, of course, crucial. Where privacy protections are weak, human rights defenders need to actively advocate for stronger ones. And even where they are stronger, we need to make sure legislation is keeping up with new technological developments, like the Internet of Things. Ultimately, if we want things to change, Human rights defenders need to make these issues accessible and relatable by being more creative about the way we talk about them. When people see how data protection and privacy affects them on a day-to-day basis, they may be more inclined to engage with these concepts. In the next video, we'll be taking a closer look at freedom.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Miles from Learning Innovation Hub PH, and welcome to our info session on data privacy in human resources. This 3-hour info session aims to help you as HR practitioners identify the potential risk in data privacy and in general approaches in addressing them. A quick reminder about this training program. 1, your microphones are automatically muted so that to avoid unnecessary noise that may disrupt our session this morning. 2, I would like to request everyone to rename themselves with your first name, last name, and your company name for attendance purposes. 3, if you have questions during the session, kindly click the raise hand button or unmute your audio to be recognized by the speaker. You can also type in your questions in our chat box. 4, unanswered questions will be read and answered toward the end of the training session. 5, soft copy of certificates will be sent to your email after the training session. 6, if you have any questions, please feel free to send us a message on the chat box located in the Zoom platform. And lastly, for those who are unable to join the Zoom meeting, you can watch this info session via Learning Innovation Hub PH and Cosent Consulting Facebook pages. Before we formally start, let's have a Mentimeter activity. Please get your secondary devices, it could be your mobile phones, laptop, tablet, or desktop, and go to the internet browser. Please type in www.menti.com. Again, please type in www.menti.com and enter the code 9671-6067. Again, the code is 9671-6067. Again, please type in www.menti.com and enter the code 9671-6067. Then click on the thumbs up logo for us to know that you are ready to participate in this activity. All right, let's begin. First question, we would like to know the sex of the participants in this meeting. Please type in your answers. All right, so most of our participants are female. Now let's proceed to our next questions. I would like to ask the position, designation, or course of the participants. Please type in your answer. So I see that most of our participants are HR staff. Okay, next, I'm interested to know how many participants, all right, let's proceed to our next question. I would like to know what industry or university school you belong. Please type in your answer. I see that most of our participants are from university, Batangas State University, healthcare and education, culture and arts. Okay, let's proceed to our next question. Kindly type in what is your business trade. All right, kindly proceed to our next question. Next is, I'm interested to know how many participants here are streaming via Zoom. Oh, sorry. Business trade, government, books printing, office administration, quality education. All right. Private school, government, publishing, business. All right. Office administration, software development. All right. Okay. Private school, government, software development. All right. Okay, kindly proceed to our next question. I would like to know how many participants here are streaming via Zoom or Facebook. Please choose your answer. All right. So most here are streaming via Zoom. And lastly, I would like to know your learning expectation in this info session. What are the different issues with confidentiality in HR, importance of learning the data privacy, more knowledge about data privacy, know more about Data Privacy Act. I expect to know how DPA works for HR, the process for data privacy in HR, will be able to practice Data Privacy Act. What are the biggest risks in data privacy for HR? Okay, knowledgeable regarding privacy in human resources, importance of data privacy, full knowledge about business. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for actively participating in this Mentimeter activity. And again, welcome to our training program. At this point, I would like to introduce our speaker this morning. He is an enterprise information security senior consultant profile. He has a total of 13 years experience in the field of information technology applied in different industries, such as banking institution, in the field of information technology, applied in different industries such as banking institution, marketing, human resource management, IT BPO, non-bank financial institution, health and government. He also performed the functions of the Data Privacy Protection Officer and Compliance Officer for Privacy, and implemented end-to-end compliance activities based on the National Privacy Commission's compliance framework, as well as international compliance methodologies for several industries such as IT BPO, government agencies, LGUs, pre-need insurance, health maintenance organization, contact center shared services, maritime manning companies, hospitals, pharmaceuticals, and financial services. Without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Sir Ernest Oxon. Sir Ernest, the platform is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Hello. Yeah, sige. So I see na karamihan sa mga participants natin are students, meron din from government and the private sector. Okay? So hello, thank you, Miles, for that introduction. I do hope everyone can hear me properly.
Yes, sure. Good morning.
Thank you. Sige, let me just share my screen. Yeah. So like what Ms. Miles mentioned, yung ating discussion today is yung data privacy risks in human resources. So in a way, it's not necessarily a data privacy awareness orientation, like what the National Privacy Commission regularly conducts, but we will do a recap on the data privacy so that we will all be on the same page on our understanding of the DPA, its requirements, its tenets, principles, and then we will be discussing ano ba yung mga risks in HR and data privacy itself. And then towards the end, we'll be discussing takeaway points. What do we need to do? How can we make data privacy actionable in our organizations such that we would be able to implement and then continuously comply? That's the end goal. Continuously comply with the Data Privacy Act. So with that, before we start, I would like all of us to go to, we'll do a quick icebreaker in a way, yung Padlet. Sir Ray, mag-stop share mo now. Can you share that?
Oh yeah, I'll share the Padlet.
Okay, thank you. So yung Padlet will just give us an idea what are our current sentiments, notions about data privacy, or in this case, yung question na dito, what are your current data privacy problems in your respective organizations? Okay. For the students in our webinar, you may want to also add there, ano ba yung na-encounter nyo na potential na-encounter na problem or challenges regarding data privacy, if there's any. Okay? Yan. So Ray shared the link to the Padlet sa Zoom chat. Sige. We'll just wait for you to answer before we start our discussion. Yeah, so one question is, do we need to hire a DPO or can it be contractual position? So I guess that's one challenge or concern that organizations encounter when it comes to complying to data privacy regulations. Kasi tinatanong nila parang, pwede bang in-house yan or pwede bang i-outsource ko na lang? Kasi often, yung company does not necessarily have the competencies or the toolkit to actually comply with the requirements of the DPA. That's why yan yung mga tinatanong nila. Parang, pwede bang i-outsource na lang ito? Later, we'll be discussing that, the answer to that question in our slides. How long do we store the old documents in the office? Again, that's a good question. So when it comes to data privacy, later we'll be answering that. Now, may principle kasi data privacy on proportionality, that we need to only be retaining information as long as we have specific purposes on them. So we cannot necessarily retain information indefinitely without any specific purpose. Do we need an NDA to comply with data privacy? So do we need an NDA? So for that question, I would pivot that question to our HR professionals in this webinar. But an NDA normally, when it comes to company, between the company and the employee, so an NDA would cover, what does an NDA cover? So for the HR professionals in our webinar, ano ba ang laman ng isang NDA? So with respect to data privacy, what needs to be in the NDA is the inclusion of personal data processed by the employees. We have to ensure that our third-party providers are also handling personal information securely. Yes. Recently, meron ng mga provisions, CVPA, that requires us, companies, that to ensure our external partners to whom we share personal data with are also secured. We need to ensure that they're also secured. So how? Ayan. Yung how na yan, we will get to answer that later. When to dispose data? Like we mentioned dun sa tanong kanina na how long can we store old documents? If we no longer have any use for the data, then might as well dispose of them, both physical and electronic. Kasi if we don't dispose, and we don't dispose the data and we no longer need it, it begs the question, why are we still keeping it? Yun naman yung magiging tanong natin doon. How do we secure data? Yeah, that's a relatively broad question. How do we secure data? Kasi ano bang data tinutukoy natin? Physical and electronic. So for these two types of information, we need to implement different security measures. Kung physical document yan, saan ba siya nakalagay? Filing cabinet, box, drawer, storage room. So, ano klaseng security measures yung pwede natin isama for that? Kung it's an electronic form, where are they stored? Mobile devices, laptops, online storage, file servers, computers, office computers, email kasama, flash drives natin. So how do we secure personal data on those mediums? So we will be, in a way, tackling answers to these questions later in our presentation. Any other problem, challenges that you, our participants, are encountering with regards to data privacy? What can be revealed in a background check? Oh, perfect question, sakto. We will be discussing that question later in our slides. So it boils down to proportionality. Okay, so what do we need to actually disclose? Ano lang ba yung required tayo to disclose? So yung babalikan natin na question on that. Yan na pa po ba nasusulat? Sir, anong sabihin pag may gumagalaw na tatlong dots? Ibig mo may nagsusulat?
May nagsusulat, sir.
Okay, good. Thank you, sir. So let's wait for one or two more, and then we'll jump into the presentation. Will you give us the principles in data privacy? In this discussion, yes. Right. However, unlike a full-blown DPA awareness session, we'll just be discussing them in the context of our topic, which is HR data privacy risks. Okay. So if you want a more thorough discussion on the principles of data privacy, rights of an individual, the CIA that we're going to mention later, and other details of the Data Privacy Act. For your respective companies, we can actually conduct free DPA awareness sessions. Okay, yun tungkol sa DPA talaga. So if you want for us to do that for your respective organizations, do contact Hussein or C Learning Innovation Hub para we can discuss how we can go about it. But for now, for this session this morning, it mostly is contextualized in the realm of HR and the data privacy risks in that sector, in that profession, in that department. Okay? Thank you for your questions. Sige. Sir Ray, I'll continue my presentation. Thank you, Sir Ray. So like I said, ito yung ating agenda. Recap on data privacy risk in HR, and then our takeaway points. Sige. So when I say recap on Data Privacy Act, ano ba yung mga provisions na meron yung batas? Okay. Well, in a high level type of discussion. Again, in a contextualized discussion, in the realm of the HR profession. So the Data Privacy Act, or Republic Act number 10173. So that's our own data protection regulation here in the Philippines. Marami ng ibang data protection regulations sa ibang bansa. GDPR is one of them, the APPI, PDPA, UPISS sa China. Meron sa states, yung sa California Consumer Protection Act, CCPA, meron sa Australia, and all of these. So atin, our DPA. So our Data Privacy Act, and similar to any other data protection regulation in the world, protects the rights of individuals. Okay? The information of individuals, not necessarily corporate information or company information or any other proprietary information, but rather information of individuals. So in the realm of HR, these are our personnel, partners, managers, stakeholders, employees, consultants, interns, kasama yan. Kasi may information din naman tayo ng mga interns natin. Yung mga nakuha ng OJT, service providers, external partners, customers even, visitors, kasama din dyan kung yung HR under din sa kanya yung admin. So all of these are people whom their personal information are being processed by, used, stored by the HR department or the HR team or the HR profession. Okay? And with the Data Privacy Act, if this information were submitted to us, to our organization, we do not become the owners of these submitted information. The owners of this information will still be the data subjects or the individuals themselves. Para clear sa ating lahat. Kasi up until now, with one of our recent consultancy engagements, they still had the misconception na, oh, sinabit sa amin yan so kami na may-ari ng information na yan. The document may be the submitted physical document, scanned copy of valid IDs, transcript records, diplomas, resumes. However, the information in these documents, we don't become the owners. The owners are still...
Sakto lang.
The owners are still the individuals themselves. So when it comes to data subject information that we need to protect, so the DPA categorizes them into two: personal information and sensitive personal information. So personal information is anything that we can use to identify someone. So if it's a name, an address, a birthday even, can help us identify people, and that's personal. Okay, as long as it helps us identify someone. So it can be anything, or it can be one information or a group of information that can lead us to the identity of someone. That's personal. Now, sensitive is specific: medical records, education, work, religion, valid government IDs, marital status, age. All of these are specific. So these are sensitive personal information. So bakit siya magkaiba? Bakit pa delineate ni NPC or the National Privacy or the DPA itself? Because if our sensitive personal information were breached, were stolen, mas malaki yung impact sa atin physically, mas malaki yung harm sa atin pag ito yung mga nawala. Case in point na lang. Pag nawala sa atin yung personal information, let's say a name and a number, personal lang yung name, number. Hindi ba nga full name, first name, last name, and a phone number. Ano yung pwedeng maging risk sa atin as individuals? Okay. If you heard about the news back in 2018, 2019, where yung naging victim ng pasaload. So by now, konti lang siguro sa atin, sa mga participants natin, and those watching in Facebook, who have not heard of the pasaload scam. Pasaload, may papadalan ka ng number, papadalan ka ng text, napadalan ka ng load, hinihingi niya ibalik kasi nagkamali sila. So, chances are people normally now, hopefully now, that people don't necessarily respond to these types of messages. However, back in 2018, 2019, there was a victim of that scam. Ano nangyari? Binalik niya yung load, sinabihan siya nung nag-text na, paki-airplane mode yung phone mo kasi ayaw ma-process nung pagbalik ng load. In that span of time, naka-airplane mode yung phone nung victim, itong nagpadala ng pasaload scam, nag-reverse social engineering na, pumunta na siya doon sa telco, nakuha niya yung replacement SIM card, napalitan niya yung social media password ng victim, up to the point na nabawasan, na nakuha niya yung laman ng bank account ng victim. Okay? Umabot siya sa, nakuha niya yung laman ng bank account. Okay? Nasa 40,000 yata yung amount. So, it begs the question, ang nakuha lang, alam lang nung hacker or nung nanakaw, pasaload scammer, ay name and number ng victim. Tas ang nakuha niya is yung bank account, tas nakuha niya yung laman ng bank account, yung pera ng bank account. So what more kung ang alam ng mga masasamang loob is sensitive personal information natin? What do you think yung amount of harm that can be dealt to these individuals? So in line with that, I would like to ask a question. In the HR profession, what type of information are we actually processing? Personal lang ba? O sensitive? I have yet to meet an HR practitioner, an HR professional who only process for personal information. Kasi malamang lahat ng HR professionals na meet ko, sensitive personal information yung pinoprocess. Clear po? So, pag nawala yan from our custody sa HR, nakuha siya, nanakaw siya, what happens to the individuals whose personal information were breached? So that's our, yun yung isa sa mga risks natin dyan. So when it comes to accountability in protecting personal data, it's the responsibility of the organization. All information under the custody of the organization, in this case, the HR professionals, in employee information, lahat ng mga data subjects we mentioned earlier, to actually protect the information that we have. And data privacy regulations, not just our own, demands internal accountability, which to a certain extent, I would like to assume, would it be fair to assume that HR professionals have a higher sense of internal accountability when it comes to processing and protecting the information in its domain? Kasi ano ba yung wealth of information na meron sa HR? Maintaining comprehensive records of its data processing system and implementation of data protection measures, security controls, to protect all of these information. This is what's required from us, from our organizations, from the HR professions, to protect personal information. Clear po? So like I said, our discussion here, when it comes to the DPA, it's always contextualized to the HR profession. So what is it that we need to do? Why do we need to protect it? Because of the wealth of information what we are collecting, processing. That's why we need to protect them. So when it comes to protecting data subject information or individual information, it's always the accountability of the head of the organization. Okay, the president, GM, CEO of our respective organizations. Sila lagi yung accountable. Okay? Now, appointing a data protection officer as required by the DPA, si DPO, siya yung ensures that the organization is complying, continuously complying to the DPA. Now, if a DPO acts alone, wala siyang kasama, wala siyang support from top management, from his peers, or from the entire organization, often, the DPO resigns from the position. And I've met several DPOs already who resigned from being a DPO since they never got any support from top management or the entire organization. Kasi mahirap. Complying to the Data Privacy Act or Public Act number 11773, the compliance activities, is not necessarily rocket science. However, it does take time. It does take a huge amount of effort to actually comply. Kasi marami kailangan gawin. Okay? So the DPO often resigns from the post pag wala siyang help. So what we normally recommend is for organizations to have a compliance team to help the DPO. Okay? And also, our external partners to whom we share personal data with or we get personal data from, sila yung tinatawag na PIC, the Personal Information Controllers or Personal Information Processors. Okay? And ito yung sinasabi natin kanina, tinanong kanina, na do we need to ensure that our external partners are also compliant? Yan yung sinasabi natin dyan. Our external partners, with regards to processing personal data, needs to also be compliant. Kasi may mga penalties ang batas natin. So unauthorized processing, we process personal data without getting the permission of the data subject, the individuals. There was an unauthorized access to the personal information, improper disposal. So it begs a question, ngayon ba, how do we dispose physical documents containing personal data? Do we convert them to scratch paper, recycle them? Do we just crumple them, throw in the trash? Yung iba kinikilo, binibenta. Kasi sayang, di ba? Sayang naman. Then again, if it does contain personal data, we need to think twice. We need to reevaluate these processes that we do. When it comes to electronic information, electronic type of information, so how do we dispose them? Yun yung improper disposal. So baka naman hindi natin dispose at all. So yung mga information na meron tayo dyan, files na meron tayo dyan for 10 years ago, 20 years ago are still there, pero we no longer use them, we don't have any purposes for them, then dapat siguro dispose na natin. Concealment na breach. Yan. May na-breach na nangyari, pero we did not inform the data subjects or NPC. Yan, dyan tayo tatamaan. Or unauthorized or malicious disclosure. All of these would amount to fines and imprisonment. A maximum of 5 million in fines and a maximum of 70 years of imprisonment. Or NPC will just issue a cease and desist orders. Okay? So may ganyan kasi. But I don't want to dwell on these penalties. I would rather dwell on the risks to the HR, to processing personal data, and risk to the individuals themselves. So meron lang din recently pinublish the National Privacy Commission during the Privacy Awareness Week this year. Yung admin fines. Ito yung, aside from the breaches na binanggit kanina, yung fine and prison, ito mostly fines. Now, if we violate the principles of the DPA, we fail to get consent, inform the data subjects of the processing that we'll be doing, their rights, our security measures, in violation of rights, 1 to 5% of the annual gross revenue of the company. Isa naman, failure to implement security measures or failure to ensure our external partners are also compliant, 0.53%. So meron din dyan na failure to register our DPOs and the companies themselves and the data processing system. So amounting to not more than 100,000. So kailangan kasi mag-register. Okay? And lastly, if we fail to comply with any commission order, nasilip yung privacy notice natin, pinadalan tayo ng notice ng NPC, oh please do this, do this, do this. Submit to us these documents. We will be auditing you later. And we fail to do that. Yan tayo tatamaan sa fine. Aside from, of course, yung mga other fines on top of these. Kanyari, failure to notify them for breaches. That alone constitutes around 500,000 to 1 million of fines, significant breaches. So aside from failure to comply with the commission order, it's also failure to that. So it's on top of that as well. So sino bang mga subjected for mandatory registration? We mentioned earlier na meron ng less than 100,000 of fines if we fail to register our companies in a DPO. If we're processing at least 250 employees, or we're processing at least 1,000 individuals. If we fall on these categories, any of these, then we need to register our DPO. We need to register our company. We need to register our data processing systems. Okay? Or we fall under these sectors. Government, which I believe meron tayong mga members ng ating webinar ngayon na nasa government. Meron bang financial institutions, telco, BPO, higher education institutions. So yung mga students natin dito, yung mga schools nyo need to comply. They need to register. Diba yung mga universities, colleges, yan. Hospitals, healthcare providers, insurance providers, pharma. And if tayo, yung business natin is providing services for other companies, naka-answer sa atin yung pag-process ng personal information nila, PIP tayo, then we also need to register. We are a company that provides services for government, then we also need to register. Kasi lahat ng third-party providers ng government agencies, kailangan mag-register din. Yeah. So it begs the question, sa atin, sa HR, since tayo nga yung HR, would it be fair to assume that we are familiar with the entire organization structure of our companies? If so, would it be fair to assume that all of the HR professionals here know who our DPOs are? Meron tayong appointed DPOs. Kung wala, malamang naghahanap tayo ng DPO. We're searching in LinkedIn, JobStreet, and all of these other platforms. So, but are we looking for the right qualifications and competencies? Magkaiba eh. May ibang qualification and competency ng isang candidate for the DPO position. Yeah. So these are the things that we need to understand when we are under the mandatory registration. Now, it's a common misconception that if we don't fall in any of these criteria, any of these conditions, we don't need to comply with the DPA. That's a common misconception. This mandatory registration on Circular 7001, these criteria states who are the companies that need to register with the NPC. However, all companies that process personal data needs to comply with the law. Para clear. Okay? Ito lang yung sinasabi kung sino yung mandated to register. If we don't fall in these categories, we still need to comply. Basically, yung sinasabi natin dyan. Okay? That's a common misconception that we've been hearing until now. Na kailangan ba namin mag-register kung wala naman kaming 20, kung wala naman 250, 25 lang kami, we're not bento, ganyan. Pero with their processing personal data, then they still need to comply. So what are the risks for non-complying? So we mentioned earlier, may fines, penalties, imprisonment, cease and desist order. However, I would rather focus on the operational disruptions to our company when we do encounter breaches because we're not necessarily complying, we're not putting in place, implementing security measures. So when a breach does occur, one operational disruption that we encounter, and I've seen this already from companies, is we need to perform admin hearings. We need to perform investigations, interviews, for us to be able to understand what happened to the breach. Kasi pag hindi natin ginawa yan, and nagreklamo yung data subject, NPC finds out about it, and kinatok tayo ng NPC, ang tanong ng NPC, anong ginawa niyo? Did you investigate at least? Are you mitigating the recurrence of these breaches? Pag wala tayong ginawa, mas malaki ang natin, magiging penalty natin. So, yung disruption sa ating day-to-day operation, especially now with the pandemic, with community quarantines, lockdowns, most, if not all companies are focusing on operations. All of our people are allocating their 8 to 10-hour work day. Siyempre, 8 hours lang dapat, pero in my observation, it becomes 8 to 10-hour work day to operations, diba? So, nawawala na yung compliance eh. So, pag may breach pa nangyari, it takes away time for us to do our day-to-day work. So, aside from that, extortion, email compromise. Kasi, at the end of the day, sino ba ang target ng mga masunang loob? It's not the people who are well-versed with security. It's not the managers. It's not IT. It's the regular rank and file personnel. Yung mga least expected to comply, especially if we don't necessarily monitor and implement and monitor our security measures that we said that we will be implementing. So, yun yung mga target yan eh. So, it begs the question, how well-versed pa are our personnel with regards to data protection measures? How knowledgeable are they with regards to data privacy? So, yun yung mga tanong natin pagdating sa HR. Kamusta ba yung training natin for them? So, yung negative impact to our reputation, to our company. Kasi now, pag nagkaroon na yun ng breach, it becomes publicized. NPC gets a hold of it, the data subject themselves go to social media, they complain, especially now, wala lang tayong ginagawa, hindi tayo nakakalis eh. Might as well type away in our social media platforms. Rant there, itong company ito, hindi nalagaan yung personal information ko, ganyan. So, ano yung impact niyan sa atin? Reputation and image, loss of client, partner trust. We now need to take time to inform all of the individuals affected by the breaches that we encountered. Clear po? So, meron lang levels of organizational compliance when it comes to data privacy, compliance to data privacy and data protection regulations. Yung ibang company, they know that they need to comply, but they choose not to. Ayaw nila. So they fall on their willful non-compliance. Others, they're ignorant about the law. They do not know na meron pa ng DPA. However, syempre, the old adage o kasabihan na ignorance of the law does not excuse everyone. So may ibang companies na, alam nila, nalaman nila, kailangan pala mag-comply. However, they still don't comply. They fall back to willful non-compliance. Most companies, ito yung ginagawa, they fall short na paper compliance lang. They register their DPOs, they copy, sorry for the term, pero yan yung nangyayari. They copy their privacy notices, their consent forms, their privacy manuals. They write privacy manuals with motherhood statements, general statements. We will implement organizational physical security measures, but not necessarily mentioning what are these security measures that they plan to implement. Paper compliance action. Okay? So if we are guilty of these, then it's time to reevaluate our position with regards to complying with data protection regulations. Because data protection regulations around the world, not just yung local natin, demands operational compliance. For us to be fully complying, continuously complying with the DPA, it needs operational compliance. We need to implement it day in, day out. We need to be able to tell our employees, all of our personnel, ganda ni gagawin. If you notice, I'm not using the term compliant. When I hear a company, a DPO, or even a president that tells me na, di compliant na kami with the DPA, I regularly, respectfully disagree. There's no such thing, there's no such term as compliant with the DPA. Because when you say you're compliant with the DPA, you're done. However, compliance with the DPA, with any other data protection regulation, is a continuous process. It's not a project where it's time bound. It's a program that we need to actually perform annually, regularly, semi-annually review our security measures. Kasi nga diyan, bakit nga ba siya kailangan continuous? Basic example na lang. I would like to ask, sige show of hands for our participants here. Ano lang, kahit mag-thumbs up lang kayo. Before, pre-pandemic, syempre pre-pandemic, who here among us regularly conducts fire drills and earthquake drills? Pre-pandemic, of course, pre-pandemic. Na lahat tayo nasa opisina pa on site. Show of hands po, kahit paano mag-thumbs up lang kayo or react in any way. Thank you, ma'am. Sino pa po? Thank you, sir. Who else? Yun, thank you. Yan, salamat po, salamat. For the others, yan, yes, meron palang next dito. Yan, thank you for those who reacted. So meron, mga nagko-conduct ng fire drills, earthquake drills. However, when an earthquake actually strikes, kagaya ng earthquake natin noong 2019 around July, na ang epicenter yata was in Zamboanga. Tama ba? I think so. Ginawa ba ng mga employees natin yung dapat nilang gawin during that earthquake? Because I would tell you, I was in a building in Quezon City, 12th floor, na lumilindol na, yung mga tao nag-meeting pa, yung iba nag-computer pa, yung iba I don't know kung iba pang ginagawa. However, they did not necessarily take into consideration, I need to do something about it already. Because it's already malakas ng magnitude ng earthquake by then, by the time it struck the area of Quezon City. So, next question, how well do our people know yung kailangan gawin when an earthquake strikes? So, how I'm relating that to data privacy. When we do an awareness session now for HR practitioners dito sa ating webinar, when we do an awareness session now, ano yung assurance natin 1 month later, at least 1 month later, or 2 months later, our people still know what to do with regards to data privacy? So that's my question. So I'll pause muna and let that question simmer, ruminate in our participants. Kasi yun yung tanong natin dyan. Pag nag-conduct ba tayo ng data privacy awareness ngayon, nag-cascade tayo ng data protection or measures natin, orient tayo ng data protection measures natin, security controls natin now, as HR, we conducted that training. 1 month later, ano yung assurance that our people are still performing them? More so, if we conducted security measures now, orientation security measures now, who's to say na 6 months later, they're still effective? Case in point, malamang all of our processes, security measures, kung meron man, back in 2019, tinapon na sila. Nagbago na ngayon sila. From the time na 2020 passed by until now, 2021, we're already in September, di ba? We're now in the second half or quarter 3 of September. So, ano yung mga processes, security measures natin back in 2019 that we're still implementing? Malamang hindi na eh. Diba? Malamang nabago na. So, kaya continuous ang ating compliance to data protection regulations because it requires us to regularly review yung mga security measures na ginagawa natin. It requires us to regularly conduct awareness sessions with our staff, with our personnel, with our employees, with the entire organization. So the DPO, kung hindi man siya part ng HR, needs the HR help. Yeah, the HR's department help for the DPO to be effectively ensuring that the company is complying. Ayun siya. Okay? Sige. Wait lang. Ayan. With that, any questions po? Meron po bang questions? You can type your questions sa chat. If you do have questions. Meron po ba? Before we jump into our next agenda. Ms. Mayas, meron ba tayong questions sa Facebook kung sakali? Hindi ko kasi nakikita ko meron. Ms. Mayas, Ms. Christine?
Do you have any questions? You can unmute yourself. You can raise your hand and unmute yourselves, or you can type it in your chat box.
Yes.
For our viewers Facebook page, you can also ask questions. You can type their questions in the chat box if you have any questions.
Meron po? Wala naman? Sige, mukhang wala naman, Sir Ray.
Yeah, you can proceed.
Sige. Kasi kung wala kang question, ako yung may question. So, ano lang, quick data privacy questions. These are just terms na binanggit natin in our previous slides na I would just request for our participants to type in your answers sa chat box na. Okay? Ano lang to? Jumbled. Hindi to very complex question. Ano lang? Jumbled letters lang. Terms, terminologies we mentioned during our previous slides. So, our first jumbled letter is this one. So, please type in your answer dun sa chat natin. Yes, thank you. Sige. Pero baliktad. Yeah, so yan yung mas tama si Sir Brian. Yeah, and the rest. Yes, tama. Thank you. Yeah, good. Thank you for your participation. Yes. Tama. Since yung word na data is only 4 letters, there's only a limited number of ways that I can jumble them. So next is this one. What is that term? Yes, thank you. Thank you po. Yeah, for those answering the chat box natin, thank you. Yeah, ito medyo mahaba. So there's a lot of ways a lot of permutations to actually do this na iba-ibang configuration ng words natin, ng letters. Our third is sige. Yan, tama. It's a common misconception that the DPO stands for Data Privacy Officer. So tama, kinorek naman ni Ma'am. So it's actually, the Data Protection Officer. Good. Sinabi ko yung sagot. Why not? Next is, again, there's only a limited number of ways that I can jumble the first word. It's 4 letters with 3 unique letters. Yeah, tama. Thank you for those who were answering. Okay? Ito. If you're going to look at the slide, nandiyan yung sagot. Thank you. Yes, it's not necessarily a data privacy tenet principle, pero it's one of the things that we wanted to ask lang. Yeah, thank you. And lastly, yeah. Yung last word, wala na akong pwedeng pang-jumble dyan. Kasi 3 letters lang talaga sila. Yung first two, oops, mali yung nakalagay dyan. It's Learning Innovation Hub. Mali pala to. Learning nakalagay dyan. It's Learning Innovation Hub. Yes. Thank you. Okay lang, okay lang. Again, the answer is right there in the screen. Okay. Kung wala pa rin kayong tanong, again, kami magtatanong. Before we dive into data privacy risks in HR, diba, I would like us to head dun sa Padlet, which Sir Ray is posted in our chat. Sir Ray, can you share? Stop muna ako. Yan. We do these exercises, we use the Padlet, para naman hindi magmukhang lecture. For those students of us participating in our webinar, ayaw natin ng mga 3-hour lecture na yung teacher lagi nagsasalita. I used to teach back in the day sa college. Ayoko rin na isa't kalating oras na ako lang nagsasalita. Nakakapagod yun eh. So maganda yung, it's a discussion, it's a dialogue between the teacher, the professor, the speaker, and the participants. Thank you, ma'am, for your thumbs up. Okay, so kung wala kayong tanong, like I said, kami may tanong dito. So our question is, what are your current data privacy issues in HR? For our HR professionals, HR practitioners, ito yung magandang tanong ninyo na. For our students who are aspiring to be HR professionals, nasa business administration and all those other related courses, ano yung mga naisip yung ibang tanong regarding related sa HR na based on the data privacy na binanggit natin? So one question here is, how long should we save the file of previous employees? Employees, hindi yata employers. Na-edit naman yata yan eh. Baka employees. Diba? Kung tayo yung HR professional or yung HR department, how long should we save the information of previous employees? It depends on the purpose. If we no longer have purposes for, nakashare po yung Viber. Yeah, thank you, sir. If we no longer have purposes for retaining the information of our previous employees, might as well dispose them. Kasi kung hindi natin ma-dispose lahat, maybe we need to perform minimalization of data, try to evaluate, perform the privacy impact assessment, and evaluate what are the information that we only need to store. Kasi doon natin makikita by doing the PIA, the privacy impact assessment. Later we'll be discussing that. We'll need, doon natin makikita na ano lang ba yung kailangan ma-store information regarding former employees. Kasi, do we need to store their birthdays? Do we need to store yung information about their dependents? Do we need to store their transcript of records, their valid government IDs? I strongly believe that we need to store or retain information such as their name, hire date, maybe yung last salary nila, their termination or resignation date. We need to store these. So, pero hindi naman siguro lahat kailangan nakatago. Our second question is, how do we apply data privacy for the employees during work from home arrangements? Perfect question. Thank you. So, we have actually a slide dedicated for that one. But to briefly answer, so the National Privacy Commission released an advisory about it last year during their Privacy Awareness Week activity. So we'll be discussing that as well, especially now with the pandemic, community quarantines, lockdowns. that for the business to thrive, not just to remain operational, but thrive. Ibang remain operational sa thrive. To thrive in this pandemic environment situation that we have, we need to find out how can we actually, what are the things we can implement, like remote work arrangements for us to be able to continue our businesses. Kasi pag hindi, if we stagnate, we just stop operations, eventually the business will die. So we need to transform. We need to digitalize, if you allow the term, our operations. So work from home arrangements, that's one way to continue our business and be able to thrive in this situation. And we'll discuss that later. How do we prevent data leaks from inadvertent causes or on purpose? So from what I'm understanding, paano natin mapipigilan yung mga unauthorized or accidental disclosures of information. Tama po ba? Sige. We need to implement security measures. But before we implement security measures and know which security measures we need to implement, again, we need to perform a risk assessment. Ano ba yung mga potential risks na meron tayo? We need to identify first, ano ba yung mga problems na meron before we can actually identify solutions or determine solutions. Kasi if we jump into determining solutions without necessarily identifying any problem, then our solution may not necessarily be an answer to our situation. How is data privacy applied? The background checking when we screen applicants. Good question. Quick answer is, ano ba yung amount of information we're getting during background checks? Are we getting the right amount of information? Are we getting too much information? Background checking kasi is always pitfall for HR to not follow proportionality with regards to data privacy principles. Kasi we tend to collect too much information during background checking, especially if we're not necessarily specific with our questions. So it begs the question to review our questions, our assessment during background checking. Yes po, yung bang data ng empleyado minsan kahit matagal na hinahanap pa rin. Yes, tama naman. Thank you, Michela. So it now boils down to how long do we need to store information? Diba? Based on our purpose. Pwede naman kasing matagal. Siyempre, we just need to have our purposes for those. In terms of company ID issuance, what are personal information we need to include in the ID? Thanks. Good question. I have with me, si Ms. Charm would have a very good example or scenario for that. However, she is unable to articulate it properly currently. So she can answer malamang your question. She can answer your question through the chat window later, and I'll be answering your questions as well. Later. So we're not necessarily expecting Ms. Charm to voice out her answer, but she can still participate. But yun, meron tayong very specific example for that, for company IDs. Ano ba dapat naman ng information ng company ID natin? Sige, with that, kung wala nang questions, wala na yata na-type. Sorry, wala na yata na-type, no? May nag-type sa chat. How secure the data privacy information prior to the crisis we're currently experiencing right now? Is there technical need for management or the HR itself? With that kasi, with the question by Ms. Dayan, is there technical need? With us transforming our businesses, our process digitally, so malamang meron ng technology involved. So dun pa lang, alam na natin na kailangan natin ng IT. Kailangan rin ng platform, kailangan natin technology. Kasi pag hindi, then how can we perform all of these work from home arrangements? Itong Zoom alone, di ba? Yes, it's a technology platform that we're using to conduct meetings, trainings, webinars. So ito pa lang kailangan agad. So aside from these, there are other and a lot more. A lot more platforms, a lot more technology assets that we'll need to implement for us to be able to thrive. Again, thrive, not just operate, but thrive in our situation. Meron pa pong, so we hope to answer that later in the rest of the questions here in Padlet. Thank you sa mga nagsulat ng mga questions natin. Sa question kanina, sa question 1, sa question 2. So Ray, siguro let's take on 1 or 2 more and then we'll proceed with the presentation. Kung meron pa.
Meron pa sir, isang nagtatype.
Sige, yan. What do you think is the strength of implementation of data privacy policy currently in the Philippines? So that is a question that's a good question, and that's a question for the regulator. But yung strength ng implementation. However, apart from the regulators' enforcement of data privacy, it's also the implementation of the organizations. Ayaw kasi natin maging pabaya when processing personal data. Ayaw natin maging pabaya. Ayaw natin. Kasi pag tayo rin naging pabaya, yung mga, kunyari, the employees, all of our data subjects, employees, visitors, partners, consultants, interns, and naging pabaya tayo sa personal data nila and we're not necessarily implementing security measures na kailangan, and tayo yung tinamaan ng breach. Sila mismo, yung mga data subjects mismo, can actually file complaints against the organization, which triggers the enforcement of the regulator, of the National Privacy Commission. Because the DPA empowers the individuals. Individuals tayo, lahat. So if we share our information online or to any other organization, we can expect data privacy being implemented by those organizations. So tayo as organizations who process personal data is expected to protect the personal data that we're processing. Again, at the end of the day, we're not the owners of the personal data submitted to us. We're only the custodians. Parang pera lang yan sa bangko. Pag nag-deposit tayo ng pera sa bangko, tayo pa rin may-ari ng pera. Same with, again, it may be not necessarily a strong analogy, but it's an analogy I can use because personal data, once submitted to organizations, the organization has the accountability to actually protect the personal data they're processing. We are processing under the HR domain. So yeah, with that, thank you for your questions. So Ray, I'll share my screen again. Yeah. So data privacy risk in HR. So thank you for those who participated. So yung tanong natin kanina, di ba? Or yung question number 2 natin, what are the data privacy issues in HR? So dito, ilagay natin, questions, challenges, and threats for the human resources function related to compliance with data privacy regulation. So ano yung mga questions na meron si HR which you answer, or which you ask? Good. Challenges natin and threats sa processing natin sa HR. Sige, Charm, gusto mo daanan muna natin yung sinugot mo or pwede naman later when we get to that part. Okay. Charm answered the question on the ID. We'll get to that part later. So, babalikan natin yung sinugot ni Charm. I'll be the one to articulate, verbalize yung sinugot ni Charm. So, risks to personal data sa HR. So, tinanong kanina sa atin, ano ba yung mga concerns ng data privacy dito sa question 1 natin? Ano ba yung principles ng data privacy? What are the tenets of data privacy? Ano yung CIA? No, it's not the Central Intelligence or the Culinary Institute. Diba? And data subject rights. There are 8 to 9 data subject rights, but for the interest of our discussion, we'll just be discussing a few of them. So when it comes to data privacy principles, there are 3. Transparency, legitimate purpose, and proportionality. So we mentioned earlier na we need to implement privacy notices and consent forms. Through the privacy notices and consent forms, we are being transparent. We're informing our data subjects. Now we are collecting these information for these purposes, and these are our security measures. We are going to share information to these people. So yun yung pagiging transparent natin. And part of that, consent, privacy statement, privacy notice, yung purpose natin, kasi nandun yung legitimate purpose natin. If we don't have any legitimate purpose for collecting so-and-so data points or data subject information, then we don't need to collect them. We don't collect them. Wala na tayong purpose eh. So remember that, legitimate purpose, especially when it comes to background checking. And proportionality. We need to only collect the information that we need to process. Again, background check. So with all of these principles, it begs a question. No, hindi ba question. It begs us to actually reevaluate our resume, our application forms, our exam, siguro kung meron man, when we do employee applicant recruitment. Kasi baka sobra-sobrang information kinukuha natin. We encountered application forms na ang kinukuha na information would be eye color, shoe size, shirt size. Meron din dyan yung salary bracket ng kapatid, salary bracket ng magulang, birthdays ng mga kamag-anak. It begs the question, why? Papadalan ba natin sila ng regalo pag may birthday sila? I guess hindi naman. So of course, that's a joke. Pero it begs the question, why do we need to collect all this information? Bakit? Para saan? Anong purpose natin? Okay? So when it comes to CIA, ititawag sa domain ng information security, cybersecurity, yung confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So the data privacy also adheres to these. Tells us, organizations, to also ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data, of the personal data we're processing. Tinanong kanina na yung pag inadvertent or accidental disclosure of data. So, saan siya dyan? What are we violating? Confidentiality. Pag nawala yung data, availability. Pag nagbago yung information nang hindi man nire-request ng data subject, integrity. Diba? Magbago yung information ng employee or ng applicant. Siyempre, pag nagbago nga yung information ng isang tao, nire-request niya. O nagpalit ako ng number, o nagpalit ako ng address. Hindi na niya siguro niya sabihin na nagpalit ako ng birthday. So, kasama yun sa rights. Right for corrections, to be informed, damages kung meron. And there are other 5 or 6 more rights na available. Marami. If you want a real detailed discussion of the data subject rights, nasa website ng NPC, or we can schedule data privacy awareness sessions, in-house training sessions for your respective organizations to have a more thorough discussion on these things. But ano bang purpose natin for these 3 concepts? Ang purpose natin is ano ba yung risks to HR personal data with regards to these tenets ng data privacy. So when it comes to principles, we're not conforming to them. Kaya nasabi kanina nung admin fines, about 1 to 5% of the annual gross revenue. So we're not necessarily complying with principles of data privacy. We're not being transparent. We don't have legitimate purpose. We're not necessarily proportional to the information we're collecting, to the retention of our data, personal data. Nagkaroon tayo ng breach sa CIA. Someone was able to access information na hindi dapat. Nag-copy yung data. Data was no longer available. Or we violated the rights of the individuals. Part ng rights nila is right to access of the data. So data subjects can actually request for access from our organization. So ano bang information ko na meron kayo? Pwedeng pakibura na. Kasama yon, right? For blocking or erasure. So if we violate these, saan tayo tatamaan? Clear? So when it comes to HR operations and data privacy compliance, we chose specific mga operations in HR that we want to discuss in this webinar that we have now. Para lang, again, contextualize yung ating discussion and medyo we hit the nail right in the head na talagang ano ba yung mga operations naman sa HR. So one of them is recruitment. Okay? Binanggit kanina yung background check, binanggit natin kanina yung application form, kasama na rin dyan yung pag-disclose later, yung disclosure information. So when it comes to recruitment, so these are just some of the HR process operations that relate to data privacy that we need to address. So talent acquisition, di ba? Consent and specificity and comprehensiveness ng application form natin. Managing applicant resumes, retention periods, and data privacy in recruitment selection process. So when we say talent acquisition, ano ba ang kinukuha nating type of profile for our applicants? Di ba? Normally we screen them first. However, when we get to screen, before we get to screen them, what do we first do? We most likely post job openings in our platforms, minsan sa social media, and all of these other job hunting platforms. Thus, from there, our interested applicants respond. However, yung maling process na nangyari is applicants tend to respond in the post themselves, tend to comment their information in the post. Especially kung social media platform yan, na public yung post, magsusulat doon yung applicant, nilagay na doon lahat information niya. Diba? So sasabihin natin as HR practitioners, hey, hindi naman tayo naglagay nun sila. So sila yung likod doon. However, then again, it goes back to us. Sino ba nag-post? Who allowed applicants to comment in that social media post? Kasi we now need to inform them, the interested applicants, na dito nyo ipadala. Yung sa ganitong medium nyo ipadala yung information nyo, ganyan. Hindi yung mag-post na kayo dyan. So, we're still accountable for that. To properly inform them, paano ba dapat sila mag-apply. Diba? So, consent specificity and comprehensiveness. It begs the question, ano ba dapat naman ng consent natin? So, consent is one of the documents required if we're going to process personal data na not necessarily mandated by law, or wala tayong contractual obligation to collect or process personal data. So consent, yung kailangan natin for us to be able to process. Ito yung permission natin. Permission from the data subjects for us to be able to process their information. So managing applicant resumes and retention periods. Ayan. So, excuse lang. I applied online for one company several years ago. Sa dulo, nakalagay doon, kung sakali daw hindi ako natanggap, I don't need to apply within 6 months. If ever nagkaroon ng opening, tatawagan na lang nila ako. Hindi ko kailangan daw mag-reapply. Yeah, but after 6 months, kailangan ko daw mag-resubmit ulit ng resume. So, back to question, bakit kaya 6 months? Ano nangyari? So, it turns out na after going through several consultancy engagement already, with HR departments on data privacy, nalaman natin na, kaya pala 6 months kasi they're retaining their information, applicant information, in 6 months. After that, they're disposing it. Yung iba, 1 year, yung iba, 1 week lang din dispose na. So, it begs the question for us, how long do we need to retain resumes, information of applicants that we did not necessarily accept or did not pursue their application? It begs on the purpose. It depends on the purpose of retaining that information. So, from the HR departments we have spoken to already, iba-iba yung kanilang retention period for applicants that they did not hire at all. So again, may 1 week lang, may 6 months lang, may 1 year, iba 5 years pa nga. Depende kasi kung mahirap makakuha ng applicant for a specific position, they normally retain it longer. Kasi mahirap nga makakuha. Pero kung yung position madali naman makakuha, marami kang makukuha applicants, they retain it shorter. So that's probably one way for you to write the consent form. So yeah, say free advice from Learning Innovation of Consent. Now, baka yun yung gusto nyo tignan. However, for us in the HR domain to properly identify the purpose, we need to perform the privacy impact assessment. through the privacy impact assessment, through interviewing the process owners, reviewing our process, doon natin talaga malalaman, ganito pala talaga natin tinatago. Clear? Data privacy, recruitment, and selection. So, ganun natin siya na-apply ang data privacy in the entire recruitment process. Collecting only information that we need at the onset. Retaining information that we need, hindi masobra-sobra. Tapos, as the applicant goes through the recruitment process and hiring process, take note, I'm delineating the two. Hindi siya magkasama. Recruitment process and the hiring process. I know a lot of companies, HR managers, ginagawa lang, they lump the two processes together. In our experience, it might be better if you separate them, recruitment and hiring process, because correct me if I'm wrong, you're collecting two different sets of information from the time na recruitment pa lang to the time na hiring na. So since you're collecting different sets of information, paano yung consent natin? Paano yung retention natin doon? Clear? So that's one thing that you might want to consider na, baka dapat hiwalayan. Kasi magkaiba yung process, magkaiba yung purpose, magkaiba yung set of information being collected. So that's how data privacy is embedded, applied in the recruitment process. Okay? Yan. I'm seeing people asking questions. Sige po, we'll go through your questions later. Okay lang? Let's go through our slides muna. Mamaya, meron naman tayong portion for Q&A. Okay? So yung next na HR operation na relates to data privacy is information disclosure. So, as you've guessed it, kasama dyan yung background information. Kasama din dyan yung pag-disclose ng isang employee sa management. Kasi from the registration that all of you went through to attend our info session this morning, you were asked ano ba yung mga questions na gusto niyo matanong, gusto niyo masagutan. So we reviewed them. So we try to place here in our discussion yung mga questions na nilagay niyo. So extent of sharing information during background check, background investigation, in surveys. Ito yan pag tayo sa HR is the one conducting background check, ano ba yung mga information na pwede nating tanungin or hingin or ibigay. Yung sa kabila naman, pag may nagko-contact ng background check sa atin, former employee na may tumawag na ina-apply ng company, nagka-background check, or a loan from a bank, that happens. So, yan yung gusto natin sabihin ngayon. So, maintaining data privacy when the company is asking too much personal information from the employees themselves. And of course, you're requiring employees to disclose vaccination status and health conditions. Okay? So, yung third and fourth, magkaiba sila. Yung isa, personal information, sometimes sensitive information being asked by the company from the employees. The last one, especially now with the pandemic, yung health status and vaccination status. Okay? So, just going through all of these topics. So, it begs the question, when companies do background checks of our former employees, ano ba yung i-disclose natin sa kanila? There's one also question na during the registration, yung pag-disclose ng information about employee to relatives, either co-employee or hindi member ng company pero relative, asawa, kapatid, or whatnot. So, ano ba yung extent na pag-disclose natin sa kanila? So, it begs the question, ano ba yung purpose for disclosing the information? So, when it comes to background check, kunyari kung for a loan application yan, nagtatanong yung bangko ng mga information about the employee. So, it begs the question, una, alam ba ng HR na, may magba-background check? So, siguro dapat yung employee, sinabihan yung HR natin na sinabihan tayo sa HR na, may magba-background check kasi nag-apply ako ng loan. Kasi pag may tumawag na bangko, air quotes, sabi, nag-loan to, tapos hindi tayo in-inform ng employee. And we blindly assumed that it was correct. It's authentic. And we gave out all of these information na hiningi ng bangko. Birthday, salary bracket, salary information, address, contact information, full name, all of these. Tapos, nalaman na lang natin na na-breach na nakawan na yung employee kasi meron pala ng background check, ipanggap na bangko, hindi para kasi natin na-validate. So, it begs the question, how often do we validate yung mga ganong klaseng background checks na nangyari? Sabi ni Privacy Commissioner Liboro, ng National Privacy Commission, na trust but verify. Pag may tumawag ng ganyan, okay, sige, paniwalaan mo. However, verify yung kausap mo. Kung sila nga ba yan? Especially now with the pandemic, ang dami na eh. Ang dami na. Pre-pandemic, what we normally would like to utter as a phrase, nagiging creative na ang magnanakaw. With the pandemic, mas nagiging creative na yung magnanakaw. Mas marami na silang ways finding out to pilfer, steal, borrow sometimes, money. Pero now, pati information kinukuha namin. Kasi information can be monetized. So, yun siya. So, it begs the question, ano ba yung, to whom are we disclosing this information that performs background checks? So, we need to validate. So, we need to tell the employees na, sabihin nyo kami pag may mag-background check para alam namin. Kung former employee yan, ganoon din siguro. Para hindi tayo basta-basta nagde-disclose information. Kung relative yan, ganoon din eh. Sinabihan ba tayo ng employee na pwede tayong mag-disclose information sa relative? That's a common issue of some companies that may mga kamag-anak, asawa, magulang, nagtatanong ng information about the employee. Kasi ang tanong, bakit ako hindi pinapadala ng pera nito? Kasi kunyari, nagbibigay ng sustento. Pero, kaya nagtatanong, sumisweldo ba yan? Nasaan ba yan? Nasa ganyan. So, that happens eh. So, if we disclose information about the employee, lagot tayo. Especially kung hindi naman niya sinabing, hindi naman siya nabigay ng explicit permission na, sige, bigay mo, pwede naman. So, when collecting information naman, when we ourselves perform background checks about our applicants, we need to inform them, we'll be conducting background investigation about you. So, yung mga binigay mo character reference, dapat alam nila na sasabihan namin sila. Clear? So, pag hindi, di lagot tayo. Tayo yung tatamaan eh. Ba't mo tinawagan si ganyan, si ganito? Diba? Kung hindi naman din pala pumayag yung applicant. Don't fall under the common pitfall, yung pit trap na, hindi, assumption yan. Assume yan na pag nag-submit ka ng ganito, mag-background check. No, don't assume that. Siguro pre-pandemic, siguro pre-data privacy for the past 30 or more years already, yan yung ginagawa. Pero with the data privacy regulations now, hindi na siya pwede gawin. So, ingat tayo sa pag-disclosing information and collecting information during background checks. Now, when management or the company itself asks too much information from our employees, i-beg the question, para saan? Kasi minsan, employees mismo feel violated if the companies are asking too much information about them. Case in point. Pero itong sabihin ko, iba-iba yung magiging treatment ng mga companies. Some companies would require employees to give them access to their mobile devices, for personal mobile devices, yung laptop or even yung mga mobile devices natin, telepono and such. So, pero yung question, bakit? Para saan? Bakit hihingi ng company yung access dun sa mobile devices ito? Or even yung mga company assign devices to our employees, pero si employee, nilagay niya dun yung personal Viber account niya, personal social media accounts niya to communicate with other employees in the company. So, hinihingi ng company, pay access sa social media account mo, sa Viber account mo. So, yung question, bakit? Para saan? With data protection regulations, bawal na kasi. Unless, of course, merong memo, part siya ng policy na, pag binigyan namin yan, ito dapat yan, may access kami dyan kasi ganito yan, hindi man sa'yo yan. So, yan yung kailangan silipin. Okay? So we need to have specific policies in place, purposes in place, and inform yung mga employees natin when we're asking these too much information about them. Na wala dun sa employee to on file nila. Now, when it comes to requiring employees to disclose vaccination status and health conditions, as far as I know, kailangan siya ibigay. Pero, sige, I would pivot that question to our expert, Sir Ray, with regards to the disclosure of health status and vaccination status, especially now with the pandemic. Ano ba yung requirement natin?
For vaccination, sir.
Yung vaccination status or health conditions, especially with this pandemic.
Yeah, for employees, there's no discrimination against vaccination. If yung mga employees they don't be vaccinated, okay lang na hindi kailangan pilitin ng employers. When it comes to knowledge, if may mga companies na kailangan i-disclose kung vaccinated ba yung tao or hindi, okay lang naman na kunin ng employer or tanungin ng employer kung vaccinated. It's more on the naman, but we don't discriminate employees who are not vaccinated. So yun yung when it comes to vaccination. So ano pa, Sir Buboy, yung mga questions?
Ayun, actually,
Yeah.
so kasi tanong natin dito, di ba? Pagdating sa HR, si employee ba required mag-disclose ng information niya about health conditions or vaccination status just sa HR? Or in this case, dun sa safety officer? Tama,
Yes. Oo. Yearly naman nagkakaroon tayo ng annual physical exam. I don't know if some of the employers, but kahit ngayon, 'di ba, medyo mahirap yung annual physical exam dahil kailangan mong pumunta doon sa mga clinic, but some of the employers are still continuing those kind of things, yung annual physical exam. For the result, kailangan ang human resource ay alam nila yung mga health conditions ng kanilang empleyado, and they are the ones who are keeping those data, kasi kailangan tingnan yung health and wellness ng kanilang mga employees. In the event na may makita or may nakita na something's wrong, kino-consult naman yan sa employee. But again, sa termination naman, it's a different story naman, ibang discussion naman siguro sa termination ng employee kung may nakitang something na problem doon sa kanilang health. But again, siguro dito sa usaping data privacy naman, the employer should know kung ano yung status ng kanilang mga employee when it comes to health, and the employers are the one who's going to keep the data. And of course, the data is confidential. It's between the employee and the employers. So hindi pwedeng ilabas sa mga other employees yung result nung kanilang annual physical exam. Ayan, sir.
Ayun, sir. Tama. Thank you. Nauna mo ako dun, sir, na ngayon, kunyari, knock on wood, meron tayong employee that tests positive. It was asked before in our previous info sessions na, si HR ba, si company ba, pwede ba niyang i-disclose sa buong company na, itong tao na to naging positive COVID positive. Bakit? Para saan? Anong purpose? Diba? The most we can do is do contact tracing. That's what's required for us to do. However, paano ba tayo makapag-contact trace without necessarily disclosing to the entire organization the health conditions of our employees? Kasi kagaya nangyari last year, yung mga tinamaan ng naging COVID positive, even though mild yung symptoms nila, nagkaroon ng discrimination from them. Discrimination sa kanila. Tama? So, ayaw natin mangyari yun kasi hindi yun pwede. Bawal nga yun . So, employee discrimination, like what Sir Ray mentioned. So, Ingat tayo when disclosing information about health conditions of our employees. Minsan, napagchichismisan lang between HR people, may dadang employee, maririnig niya, oh, ito pala si ganito, ganyan, ganyan, ganyan. That also happen. So, these are the things that we need to put front and center as a forethought in our compliance data privacy. We need to consciously take into consideration yung pag-process natin, pag-use natin, pag-disclose natin ng information, especially yung HR information na meron tayo. Kasi take note, again, I'll throw the question back at you, our HR professionals. Ano ba yung wealth of information na pinoprocess ng HR domain? Malaki, malaki. So ingat tayo sa pagdating sa disclosure. So another process, ito na sabi kanina, work from home or remote work. Now, we mentioned earlier that the National Privacy Commission published their advisory last year on work from home arrangements. Ano yung mga recommendations nila na kailangan gawin ng mga companies pagdating sa remote work. So some of the aspects lang that we need to have implemented is clear defined policies and guidelines. When I say clear defined policies and guidelines, ano lang ba dapat ang ginagamit ng employee to connect to corporate resources, to log into meetings, online meetings, seminars, perform their functions. So ano yung mga policies natin of those? Ano ba yung mga platforms, technology assets that we need to use? Tinanong kanina, di ba? So kailangan may mga technical aspects na. Yes, with what we're doing now, we're trying to digitalize or transform digitally our processes, especially in HR, unless we want to go to the office always. Diba? So, meron tayong mga technology assets we need to use, and hence, we need to implement security measures for these. Access to personal information on an as-needed basis. Okay. Ayaw natin magbigay ng information sa isang tao na perpetually may access na siya sa lahat ng information natin. Especially now with the pandemic and remote access to corporate resources or information, kailangan controlled natin siya. We need to be able to provide the access kung kailan lang kailangan or in an as-needed basis. Pag hindi na kailangan, dapat we revoke the access to these resources or information. Kumbaga, kung function naman niya to process information day in day out, sige, okay, walang problema, pero we need to now to monitor. Kasi paano pag siya yung tinamaan ng breach? Siya yung na-hack. We mentioned, di ba, na in an organization, the weakest link is still the people. The people that process information. Sila yung tatamaan ng ransomware, sila yung tatamaan ng virus, and these ransomware tend to, especially now, look for access to corporate resources that's accessible by the employee. So monitor company-issued computers and personal devices accessing corporate resources. So we mentioned company-issued computers and devices. Kung company-issued yan, okay lang, madali i-monitor. Kasi company-issued yan eh. Pero pa personal device yung pinang-access sa corporate resource, we need to be able to inform our employees na, oh, we will be monitoring your access. Kasi pag hindi natin monitor, ano tingin nyo pwede mangyari? Diba? It can be na sobra-sobra yung access information na hindi man dapat. Okay? So immediately report incidents involving unauthorized disclosure and personal information. Now, with the pandemic, all of us most of us, if not all of us, working remotely. Vigilance is still called for, especially now. And when it comes to vigilance, when we encounter incidents, breaches, viruses, ransomwares, we need to be able to inform the people that make the decision. We need to get the correct information to the people who makes the decision for them to be able to decide ano pwedeng gawin. Kasi if we don't, and often in an organization, around 60% to 70% ng breaches, incidents, tinatago na lang. Kasi baka mapagalitan. And ano ba yung mga bridges na meron sa HR? Nagpadala ng spreadsheet na containing personal information ng employees sa maling tao. Kasi nagta-type ng letters dun sa to clause ng recipient clause ng ating email. Merong suggestion yung email, nag-enter, nag-send agad, nang hindi man lang binasa kung kanino pinadala. Diba? Human error. Nag-disclose information through a different medium, yung mga other communication mediums that we have, sa maling tao ulit. So, yan yung common incidents na nangyari sa HR. With the wealth of information that we have, napapadala natin sa maling tao. Or, nabubura natin, nadidelete natin. Integrity is compromised. Kasi we now have direct access to the resources, na spreadsheet, na online, na nabigyan natin access yung ibang tao na hindi man dapat. So, ito yung mga bagay na we need to always look out for. And if it does happen, we need to inform the proper incident response team, if we may, like we mentioned earlier, dun sa recap natin, or yung management natin sa HR, yung supervisor natin, uy, may nangyaring ganito. Huwag natin itago. Kasi pag tinago natin, hindi siya magagawa agad ng paraan. Often, the nature of people, I guess not just Filipinos, but people in general, pag may nangyaring mali, ayaw mapagalitan eh. So they would rather just, tatago ko na lang, sweep it under the rug, if you may, ba yung old adage na yun nga, or kakalimutan ko na lang, nagkaroon ng ransomware, reboot ko na lang computer ko, yung pala hindi ko na ma-access. So all of these needs to be reported properly at makakarating dapat sa DPO. Kasi pag hindi niya magagawa yung tama, yung kanyang role, yung kanyang trabaho, DPO. Clear? There are other recommendations ni NPC pagdating sa work from home arrangements. Nandun naman niya sa advisory nila. You can find that in their website. So ito lang yung some of the provisions na meron sila na all of us here might want to consider and implement. Another process na meron si HR is yung outsourcing. Okay? So minsan ina-outsource natin yung pag-process ng information to third-party providers, external partners. With the pandemic now, ano ba bang ina-outsource? Yung platform. Di ba? So yung paggamit ng mga HRIS platforms, naka-outsource din yan. Clear? Clear po? Sana clear pa? So yun yung HR systems na sinasabi natin. So yung pag-audit sa atin ng mga external partners natin, ng pag-review nila ng mga HR files. So kasama din dyan yung minsan kumukuha tayo ng consultants and we outsource some of our HR process to them. Yung pag-process into one file. So naka-outsource din siya, di ba? Yung pag-process ng, kagaya sinabi na sa dulo, yung HR function services, yung pagkuha ng headhunter, recruitment agency. So all of these are outsourced process of HR. So it begs the question, when we do outsourcing, or when we outsource some of our process in HR, are we ensuring that our third-party partners, external partners, are also complying to data privacy regulations? Or tayo naman, pag naka-outsource sa atin yung process ng ibang company, ganun din, are we also complying to data privacy regulations? When we share information to all of these external partners, training and development is also one of the things na nakita kong nangyayari when it comes to HR. Kumukuha tayo ng external speaker to conduct a training. Ang ginagawa natin, binibigay natin yung information ng mga participants sa speaker. It begs the question, bakit? Para saan? Often, ang ginagawa ng speaker niya, ginagamit niya yung information na nakuha niya for marketing purposes to send out other trainings. Part ba yun nung purpose ng pag-send sa kanya in the first place? Is it written in a contract that we have with that person? Yung pag-share natin ng information. So these are the things that we need to consider, we need to understand when outsourcing processes in HR. Okay? So I do hope clear siya. Sige, yung mga questions nyo, I see na meron namin na nakakasulat. Good, thank you for your questions. Just keep them coming. We'll be answering them towards the question and answer portion of our discussion. Clear? So, kung meron kayong mga tanong sa recruitment, disclosure, outsourcing, just write them there. Work from home even. Write them there, we'll be able to answer them later. Okay, we'll just go through our slides para clear sa atin. Okay? So again, you training development, sometimes we hire speakers or yung mga training companies, training institutions that provide these and that certification. We send our employees to them. Sometimes we send the personal information of our employees. So hanggang saan lang ba dapat sisinad sa kanila? Para saan ba dapat nang sisinad sa kanila? Kailangan ba i-send yung contact information, birthday, position, why? It begs the question, tayo as the custodians of the information, why do we need to send this information to them? So yun yung sana makuha natin from this info session. Start asking the question why. Why are we processing this information? Why are we collecting this information? Why are we outsourcing, sending out this information? Kasi yung why natin, sasagot dun sa proportionality, legitimate purpose, and once we know the why, we can easily be transparent to our data subjects. Clear po? So, common questions lang that we encountered in our consultancy engagements, in our previous info sessions on HR, and data privacy. So, how is data privacy essential to HR? Diba? By now, I do hope we were able to answer that. So, paano siya naging essential sa HR? So, a quick answer to that is a question. Sorry, if you allow it, an answer to this question is a question. Ano ba yung wealth of information? What's the wealth of information being processed by the HR professionals or the HR domain? Does it not include personal information or sensitive personal information? If it does not include personal data, then data privacy is not essential. However, we know that's wrong. Okay? The HR domain processes sensitive personal information, not just personal. And since it processes personal data of individuals, data privacy is very essential, very significant, relevant. So we need to comply to data privacy regulations. How does data privacy affect us as part of human resources? So how does it affect us? With, alam natin na essential ang data privacy sa HR. Since essential ang data privacy sa HR, we now need to implement security measures, policies to protect the personal data that you're processing. So how does it affect us, individuals, HR professionals, individuals in the HR domain? We need to implement, we need to be able to, day in, day out, protect the personal data that we're processing. So that's how it affects us. Tayo kasi mag-implement yan eh. Hindi naman siguro yung IT, hindi naman siguro yung legal or yung operations. Na kanina ba yung employee to one file? It's with us. Kung may HRIS yan, siguro nasa IT din. So dapat sila rin meron. Kung external provider yan, dapat sila rin meron. Dapat meron din silang data protection policies nila. Limits in Data Privacy Act in relations with employee data. So again, when it comes to employee data, as long as it's personal, yun yung scope ng data privacy. When it's no longer personal, hindi na siya scope ng data privacy. So yun yung limitation ng data privacy natin. However, I would ask you again the question. Pagdating ba sa employee data, alin ba doon ang hindi personal? Or if I'm going to rephrase my question, is there parts of employee data that is not personal? If your answer is yes, then yun yung limitation ng data privacy. But if your answer is no, lahat na nasa employee 201 pertains to an employee can help us identify someone that's personal information, then it's within the scope of the data privacy. Clear? Kasi minsan sabihin natin, oh hindi, salary bracket. Siguro kung salary bracket lang at walang ibang information, probably hindi siya personal. Pero kung may salary bracket tas may employee ID or contact information, that can identify that individual. So magiging personal siya. So another question that we get to ask, get asked to us by HR professionals is yung career path ng DPO. Kasi siyempre, sino ba mag-hire ng DPO kung ang company walang DPO? Si HR din naman. Especially kung si company would like to hire a DPO rather than appoint someone internally. So again, I mentioned when hiring a DPO, we need to look into the qualifications and the competencies of the applicant. Hindi lang yung qualification, pati yung competency. Iba kasi sila. In my experience with HR professionals, pagkala ko magkaiba ang competency sa qualification. So for those of us here who beg to disagree, siguro try to evaluate ano bang difference ng qualification sa competency. Kasi qualification, ito yung mga nagagawa ko. Competency, ito yung kaya kong gawin. Tama po ba? So I do, with that analogy, you get to tell me, you get to tell us kung yun nga ba yan. So DPO career path, marami kasing pwedeng magyari sa isang DPO. Kagaya ng sinasabi ng 10-point compliance framework ng NPC, yung number 7 yata or number 8, kailangan may continuous training. Ang isang DPO, yung compliance officer privacy, yung compliance team, yung buong organization when it comes to data privacy compliance. So, a career path for a DPO is providing the DPO training, certifications, meron. Sige, with regards to certifications, marami na eh. There are several firms already locally that provide, quote-unquote, certifications for DPO. Certified DPO, enabled DPO, training programs for DPO, even degree programs for DPOs. However, si NPC pa rin ang nagbibigay ng DPO ACE program nila, the Data Protection Officer Accountability, Compliance, Ethics Training Program nila. And now, NPC is slowly accrediting firms, siguro, that can also offer the certifications. So you might want to look into that. Pero sinabi natin, continuous training ng DPO, kailangan ma-provide. However, syempre, HR perspective. When we do train the DPO, ano tingin nyo pwedeng gawin ng DPO after being trained? After getting the experience? Ano tingin yung different? Ay, ano tingin yung ginagawa ng mga appointed DPOs na na-train, nakuha na experience? What do they do afterwards? Sige po, if a quick question lang on those. Sa chat nyo lang isulat, tingnan natin kung for yes, thank you. Thank you, sir. Sir pa pala yung nagsulat. So, for those who agree, sige nga, show of hands. React nyo na lang. Show thumbs up, react to the message na nilagay ni Sir Ray. Ang mga DPOs, once they actually get the competencies, once they actually build the toolkit, the experience, the training that they need, often, they resign from the post. Ayaw na nila maging DPO ng company. Bakit? Hindi sa ayaw nila maging DPO. They look for better opportunities. Train na sila eh. Yes, thank you, ma'am. Train na sila eh. They're now more experienced, competent. And across the entire world, maraming pa rin nag-aarap na there are still organizations who put premium to the DPO role. So, ano kailangan gawin natin sa mga appointed DPOs? Alagaan sila. In my experience, for the consultancy engagements that we had in the past, there are a total, marami na ako na-count na mga DPOs, after nila ma-train, umalis sila. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months later, they leave. And they apply to a different company for a better salary, benefits. Dati COP lang sila, tapos naging DPO na. So that happens. So with that, I throw the question to our HR professionals. What do we do? How can we secure our DPOs na hindi tayo iniiwan basta-basta? Ano bang pwede natin gawin? I believe our HR professionals would be better equipped to answer that question. So how to deal with an employee who will leak data privacy? What? Who leaks personal data? Ano pwede gawin? Okay, an example lang. There are other organizations we consulted for who encountered breaches, incidents na either unintentional, accidental, inadvertent, or intentionally, maliciously discloses personal data. Okay? So, in all of those scenarios, ano bang pwedeng gawin ng isang company? It begs the question, ano bang policy natin sa companies natin? Kasi if we don't have any policy for that, then baka wala natin pwedeng gawin. Often, nakikita kong ginagawa ng company, they want to terminate the employee. And when they ask my opinion, when they ask me, I ask them, oh, do we have a policy for that? Do you have a policy for terminating employees pag ito yung ginawa nilang violation? Sabihin nila sa akin, wala. Oh, bakit natin i-terminate? Hindi sa ayaw kong i-terminate or ayaw kong i-address nila. However, if it's not in their policy, wala silang pwedeng gawin. There were some companies ang ginawa, sinuspend lang nila, nilipan nila sa ibang department, pero hanggang doon lang yung pwedeng gawin. Kasi kung walang policy, then there's nothing else that they can do about it. Sir Ray, sa DOLE, ano bang sabi pagdating dyan? Policy-based ba siya talaga dapat o meron pang underlying mandate pagdating sa labor?
Alin, sir? Anong
Pagdating sa sa panghuling how to deal with an employee who leaks data privacy?
Company policy.
Intentionally,
you need to have a concrete company policy. Important
yun. Terminate. Yun. So, yun yung sabi natin. Pag nag-terminate ka ng walang grounds, hindi mo policy siya, hindi alam ng tao na pwede pa siya ma-terminate with that, wala sa kontrata, wala sa manual or what, pwede pa tayong kasuhan. Tama ba, Sir Ray? Kasi parang siya, parang unlawful termination.
Wala sa authorized causes of terminate, just an authorized causes.
Yun. So, yan yung kailangan natin intindihin. So, policies. Ano ba mga policies natin sa HR that allows us to impose penalties, sanctions to our employees. Normally, di ba, meron pang mga first, second, third warning, may mga NTEs pa dyan. So, yan yung mga things that we need to have in place. Kasi pag wala, there's nothing we can do. The most we can do is suspend, lipan ng department, wala. Or offer an early retirement, if that's even possible. And yung gusto natin sabihin huli would be, are there templates for the privacy documents available? Now, the National Privacy Commission has published several circulars, advisory opinions, advisories, its toolkit that contains already templates when writing the privacy documents required to comply with data privacy regulations. Nandiyan yung consent, privacy notices, manuals, PIA mismo, and all of these other. Later, I'll be discussing that in our next agenda para to give better idea on these. Diba? With that, any questions? We go through our questions sa chat. Pero before that, sinagot ni Ms. Charm yung tanong kanina sa ating Padlet on the ID. Sabi ni Ms. Charm, hi everyone, regarding ID, please keep in mind that IDs are worn to office premises. And malamang sa office lang talaga kailangan siya suotin. You don't need to wear your IDs, company IDs, when you go to, pre-pandemic of course, when you go to malls, ride public transportation. Uh, and are sometimes accidentally kept within the employee, even outside the company premises. So, kung maraming nakasulat na information dyan, it exposes the individual to the public. Yeah? So, employees generally have their own IDs, which is used for formal transactions. So, minsan or before, ginagamit yung company ID as a valid ID kasi it contains government IDs as well. Yung mga ID numbers natin from government issued IDs. So, now, recently, companies tend to include the least number of information in our IDs. Kung pwedeng first name, last name, company, tapos siguro emergency contact, that's it, or company address. That's it. Pero still it begs a question for your implementation of your company IDs. OA naman pag masyadong nyo tinanggal lahat. Ang iniwan nyo ng pangalan tsaka company name. Employee name tsaka company names. Wala nang iniwan. Medyo OA. So, pero if that's your purpose, if it serves your purpose rather, then okay lang. But at the end of the day, we need to identify ano ba yung purpose natin for removing or minimizing the data included in the IDs. So for us to be able to identify the purpose, we need to be able to perform the privacy impact assessment. Yung privacy impact assessment kasi is our assessment of the process that we do in HR. That includes ID printing and includes the information, the amount of information stored in the ID. Clear po? So I do hope that's answered. Meron tanong dito sa atin si Miss Jane. Are those in HR need to provide consent form if a manager is requesting for a copy of their employment contract? Sinong manager, anong purpose ng paghingi ng contract, and kaninong contract ba yung hinihingi? Yun yung mga tatanungin natin. Before we jump into consent, kunyari, as an HR manager, merong isang manager pa na humingi ng employment contract niya. Kung employment contract niya, I guess okay lang. Dapat nga may copy siya ng employment contract niya. Yes, ma'am. Ikaw ang nagtanong. I see your hand. Pero sagutin ko muna. I'll try to answer muna. To my interpretation of your... Yes?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Go.
Okay, just to clarify yung question, yung manager, ang hinihingi niyang contract is yung
employee
or employment contract is yung sa staff niya.
Clear. So my immediate answer to that is, kung ako yung HR manager, ang tatanungin ko sa kanya, bakit mo kailangan? Para saan? Unless of course, policy natin sa company na accessible sa ibang managers yung employment contracts ng ibang employees, then okay lang, I guess. Pero kung hindi siya policy, it begs the question, para saan? Bakit niya kailangan kunin? Diba? Kasi kung wala naman siyang purpose, bakit niya kailangan? So, rather than immediately hanapin, bigay sa kanya, yun siguro muna. Kasi HR protects the information of employees. Even from people in that company, from other employees.
Okay.
Yan po.
Thank you.
But again, if you have the policy na kaya ma-access ng ibang managers yung employment contact ng staff, then okay lang, walang problema. Paano kung meron na siyang inihingi information, di tanungin na lang niya. Uy, itong ganito, ano bang qualification to organize? Di sasabihin na lang ng HR. Yun po, thank you. So may tanong si Miss Jean. Still, some were not aware of the content to be inputted or to be shared in the application form in the CV. Wait lang po. Yan. Hi, Miss Jean. Hello po. Ito yung question nyo?
Yes, sir. Actually, it's not a question, but it's just parang insight, no? Kasi lalo na ngayon, we have some participants here, yung mga students. And as part of the admin and human resource officer in our organization, we noticed that some of the fresh graduates are sending CVs and PDS that includes their personal information. Actually, yun yung una kong nakikita doon yung mga date of birth, saan sila pinanganak, yung mga ganun. I think that is very irrelevant when applying for a certain position. So yun lang po yung gusto kong isabihin, sir. Gusto kong i-share doon sa mga students that were here joining this session, that please don't put some additional information that is not related to the job that you are applying for.
Thank you, ma'am. Sige, to add to that, So yun yung sabi ni Miss Jean, recommendation niya sa mga student participants natin. But I would also add something for the companies themselves. Now, during recruitment, when asking for information about your applicants, maganda nang be specific. Okay? So we're telling our applicants, our students, our graduates, our future HR professionals to only disclose information that is necessary for recruitment. It goes the same for the recruitment officer, the HR personnel, the hiring officer, the company, to only ask for information that's necessary for recruitment. Kasi I've encountered other companies na recruitment process nila. Thank you, ma'am, for the thumbs up. Yung recruitment process nila, nagtatanong sila na, tell me something about yourself. So, napaka-vague ng question. Ang tendency ng applicant, magsulat ng litanya na kung ano pa yung ibibigay niya information about his or herself. Pero kung specific yung question natin, edi alam niya kung ano lang dapat isulat niya. Often kasi pag tell me something about yourself, ang dami mo nang nakwento, ang dami na kwento ng applicant na hindi naman kailangan in the recruitment process. So tayo rin as the hiring officers, HR department, we also need to reevaluate the questions that we ask during recruitment. So thank you, ma'am. So sabi ni Sheila, need to formally request with purpose, name, position, and company. Saan po to? Sorry. Miss Sheila? Miss Ryla? I think this is an answer dun sa isa sa mga discussions natin earlier. Sige lang. Is it lawful for company clinic to require its employees to submit a copy of their vaccination card? Yan. So Ray, meron akong question, if you're here. Ang tanong sa atin, is it lawful for company clinic to require its employees to submit a copy of their vaccination cards?
Nag-send na ako, sir, ng
Meron na, may reply ka na dyan.
ang sabi ko, there is no law or policy that require employees to submit a hard copy of or a copy of their vaccination cards. Kasi yung ibang employees ayaw naman magpa-vaccinate. So wala namang policy na kailangan lahat ng empleyado ay vaccinated o bakunado. So there is no policy mandated by the government.
Clear. Sige. So I do hope clear tayo dyan. So if your company requires employees, for those who are vaccinated at least, to submit their vaccination cards, it begs the question, why? Bakit? Para saan? Proof ba yan na nagpa-vaccine sila? If it's just a proof, baka showing it to the company clinic, safety officer, HR would suffice. Kasi pag nag-submit ng copy, ano sabihin nun? May kopya ka na document na nasa iyo. So what do you do with that? Anong gagawin mo? Are you going to remind them, second vaccination mo na, malapit na? Is that your purpose? So, ibig sabihin, bakit mo kailangan hingin from your employees? Pero again, to validate na nagpa-vaccine na sila, probably showing you a copy of it would suffice already. Or kung mag-submit mo sila ng copy, then yung next is to dispose of it already. Yes, Ms. Jean.
With regard, sir, dyan sa showing of the vaccination card, in our office, no, sa organization namin, we are required to submit the list of those people who were vaccinated, the purpose of which is to know kung ilan na ba yung tao na vaccinated at saka yung hindi pa. Because in our organization, we offer vaccines for our personnel. Yun po yung pinaka-purpose din sa amin. Yeah.
Good job kayo, John. Thank you, ma'am, na your company is offering. So, yeah, that's one valid reason, no? Why the company would be asking for a list of people in his organization, sino ba yung vaccinated. Kasi kasi they offer. Good yun, ma'am. Good. Thank you. So that's one valid purpose. Pero siguro yung next na lang dun, in line with data privacy, once you have that list, dapat pangalagaan. Protect that list. So ayaw natin siya ma-disclose, mapalabas, lalo na kung meron dun listahan ng mga hindi pa vaccinated. Again, discrimination yung pwedeng puntahan. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your thumbs up. So si Ms. Jane, HR stores more personal and sensitive. Yan, yes, tama. HR stores sensitive personal information of the company. I think sir, qualifications the sets of standards required for the job. Yes, and then yung competency is how well can you do the job. Yes. So yung looking for greener pastures, ito yung ginagawa ng mga DPOs. Once they're properly trained, experienced, they leave. True enough. Nangyayari yan. Especially if they're not necessarily well taken care of at alam nila na merong ibang company na mas mataas magbayad, malaki benefits. That happens. So what do we do? Ayun. So how about department managers getting the 201 file of their employees? Sinagot natin kanina. So again, it depends on your policy. Kung hindi nyo naman policy na mag-disclose ng employment contract to other managers, begs the question, bakit na hinihingi? Kung meron silang specific na gusto mong information makuha, then dapat yun lang siguro yung hinihingi nila. Yun na lang i-disclose natin sa HR. Okay. Nasagot ko naman yung mga tanong. So, Sir Ray, meron ba tayong tanong sa ating broadcasted?
Wala naman tanong, sir,
wala naman.
sa Facebook.
Sige. Kung wala tayong question, can I see a thumbs up or react? Anything from our participants? Kung clear na tayo sa HR operations. Yun, thank you. Yes. Ms. Jean, are you raising your hand or thumbs up ba yan? I guess thumbs up na yan.
Actually, sir, I have one question for Sir Ray.
Oh, Sir Ray.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir. With regard to the information disclosure, no, this is in relation to the current pandemic situation, no. Doon sa mga employees na nag-positive, no, there were contact tracers from DOLE and DOH, no, calling some individuals and sending forms to be filled out, no. And ang tanong ko dito, sir, is what are the informations that the employees need to disclose, like yung health information, then may mga nakalagay kasi doon na part nung form is the date of birth, the province, and marami doon, sir, that we think that is very irrelevant for the health information purposes lang. So, what are the requirements, no, or what the informations that we need to disclose lang? Parang, eto ba kailangan talaga namin i-filled out lahat ng kailangan doon na nakablank, or kailangan lang piliin nung tao kung ano lang yung particular information na kailangan niya i-disclose?
Okay, I guess this question, ma'am, magpo-fall siya dun sa occupational safety and health kasi it's more on the contact tracing questions eh. Usually, ang tinatanong lang dyan is yung address kapag nagko-contact tracing. Tapos yung basic questions kung ikaw ba ay nilalagnat or may mga symptoms pa ng pag-ubo, sore throat, and everything. Pero yung date of birth and other relevant information, for me personally, hindi na rin kailangan yung mga yun. Tinanong na rin namin yan doon sa mga safety practitioners na nagmo-monitor ng mga contact tracing doon sa kanilang company. May mga informations na hindi irrelevant na hindi na kailangan i-fill out. Lalo na doon sa mga information yung sinabi nyo kanina, yung mga kung saan pa bang mga municipality sila nakatira, mukhang irrelevant. Yung mga informations lang na sa tingin natin na talagang relevant doon sa data gathering or doon sa tinatawag na contact tracing. Sir Buboy, doon sa sa contact tracing, ano ba yung mga relevant informations na kailangan pa?
Ms. Jean, sir, ibang, yung sagot ko actually iba na konti. Yes, there are, if the company itself or other organizations is the one performing the contact tracing, then the information collected should be closely related, very closely related to the purpose, which is contact tracing. However, the way you see it, pag government yung nag-perform ng contact tracing, nagbigay ng form, si government na mismo, chances are all of those would be required. Kasi unless we want to question yung government agency that's doing the contact tracing, we cannot necessarily say na ayoko bigay yan kasi data privacy. Remember, and I do hope everyone remembers this one. Back in January 2020, last year, nung papalapit pa lang yung Chinese New Year, last January 2020, nung sumabog pa lang yung taal, DOH and all the other agencies conducting contact tracing of the people who were patients under investigation, mga PUI, ganyan, monitoring, and asking the airlines where sinong katabi nito, ganyan, and the airlines were reluctant in disclosing the information. Even other companies were reluctant in information because of their privacy. It impeded the initial contact tracing efforts. That's why back then, NPC gave an announcement na huwag mo sabihin data privacy yung dahilan mo for you not to disclose the information. Because national security, health and safety nung mga tao ang involved. So pag ano yung tinanong ng government agency or ng mga health organizations, yan yung kailangan ibigay. Kasi sila yung authorized to be able to collect these. So ito yung para sa contact tracing. So pag tayo sa organization natin, we now start building yung forms na contact tracing form na sinasabi, pagpapasok ko sa isang building, susulat mo yung ganyan. Tayo, kailangan natin talaga suriin ano lang ba dapat yung hihingi natin information. Contact information siguro, a number, address, name. Aside from that, there's nothing else that we need to collect. Parang bakit pa natin ko collect yung iba? However, if it's the government agencies themselves are they doing it, then sila yung have the know-how, the right, the knowledge. Ito yung kailangan kong information for us to be able to build a profile of that person, for them to be able to do contact tracing correctly. Kasi at the end of the day, sila rin kasi nagko-contact tracing. Hindi naman tayo sa organization. Tayo sa organization natin, tayo lang yung nag-keep track kung saan nagpunta yung employee, kung saan nagpunta yung tao. Pero ultimately, the one doing the contact tracing is the government. So, with regards to questioning the form, siguro we can ask it from DOLE, from DOH, or from any of these other government agencies or health organizations or authorized to do contact tracing, na bakit kailangan yan. Pero kung tayo mismo, we have control. Ano lang ba dahil kailangan natin i-collect. So I do hope I was able to answer that question, Ms. Jean, pagdating sa contact tracing.
Yes, sir. Because the Coast Guard, for the government agencies kasi katulad sa amin, iba yung form na binibigay yung standard form from the government side, and then pagdating sa contact tracers kasi iba din yung binibigay nila na form, pero minsan kasi tinetext lang nila yon. But for everyone's information, yung contact tracers kasi natin is not a regular employee of the government. They were just hired for this particular purpose.
Contractual. Yes.
Yeah, contractual sila. And then meron na silang data kasi pagdating ng
pag-reply mo sa nila.
Yeah, yes. The moment you replied, meron na silang personal information. The question there is, how do they dispose those data na being stored doon sa mobile phone nila?
Ang sagot ko dyan, yung agency that hired them needs to have those policies in place. Kasi in the past, last year, COSEIN conducted several awareness sessions with our clients. One of them are LGUs. Hindi ko na siguro sabihin, LGU, somewhere north. We conducted a DP awareness session to almost 200 or so hired agents for the contact tracing. So, kasi sila yung magtatawag sa mga tao. So I told the LGU itself na kailangan si LGU, meron kayong policies in place na itong mga that governs the operations of the contact tracers. Na yung pag-collect ng information, like you said, yung pagkuha sa mobile devices, kasi malamang personal device yung gamit nila, unless mayroong in-issue na device yung LG or yung agency. Diba? So, sila yung kailangan mayroong policy. So, yung retention disposal nila, dapat, ano yan, part of that. So, ma'am, tama no? From Coast Guard kayo. Yun, thank you. So, like you said, yung mga agencies that hire these contractual volunteers to do the contact tracing for them, yun, kailangan merong data protection policies that govern them. Kasi with the wealth of information that they're processing, yes, tama. Sa vaccine na lang ang dami. When I had my vaccine, ang daming hiningi na information, ang dami kong nakausap, para lang yan, ang dami kong finilapan. So, kailangan sila mismo, all of their workforce of the LGU that distributed that vaccine, yun, kailangan may data protection measures in place. Yun po. You can indicate confidential on fields that are not irrelevant. These contact tracers are also bound by data privacy agreement. Yun, yes. Chances are, meron silang NDA, part ng contractual agreement nila with the agency is to also uphold data privacy. So yan yung mga kailangan in place. Tayo naman, sa HR department, regardless kung government or private sector, we also need to implement that. Diba? Pag sa hiring process, may NDA tayo, may employment contract tayo, na nakasulat doon, ano yung mga information na accessible lang sa employee natin, and so on. Clear po? So I do hope we were able to answer your questions. Again, thank you, ma'am. Again, thumbs up ulit for those who did not ask your question pero enlightened sila just sa ating discussion. Mag-react na lang kayo. Yan. Thumbs up, wave, smile, doon ano. Yan. Thank you, ma'am. Kung hindi man tayo magta-type doon sa chat. Para hindi magmumukhang kami lang ni Sir Ray nagsasalita. Anyone else? For our students who are here, who attended the webinar, we read that during your registration, the reason why you attended here is for you to be able to know ano yung implications ng data privacy sa future profession nyo, which is in HR. Another one is parang paano nyo to magagamit sa inyong HR profession. So, related questions. So, the main assumption that we have here at Kusain and Learning Innovation Hub is all of you, not yung mga professionals natin kasi alam na nila, yung mga students na nandito sa atin, all of you were listening attentively and were able to digest and understand correctly yung mga diniscuss natin today. Kasi yung mga nakuha natin ngayon, if you're going to apply for an HR role later, can be your advantage. Knowing already data privacy, compliance tenets, principles, sentiments, thoughts, compliance activities would be your edge when you start applying for a career in the HR profession. Clear? So for our students, I would like to see sana your thumbs up or reaction kung naiintindihan nyo nga yung ating mga sinasabi. Yung mga na-share ng ating mga professionals dito, HR professionals. Thank you. Sa thank you sa 4 na nag-5. Thank you. For the 5 people that gave us the thumbs up, thank you. For the siguro rest of the 60 people here in our webinar who are students, I do hope you were able to understand. Yun yung challenge ko sa inyo dyan. Okay? I normally give that challenge to my students before. When dealing with a 40 or so classroom, and when I ask questions, tutungo yung iba, magtataas ng kamay yung iba, and I tell them, for the rest of you that did not react, sana naintindihan nyo. Kasi pag hindi nyo, wala kayong ma-apply. You won't be able to apply anything that you've heard now. Okay? Clear? Okay, with that, bring on. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So takeaway points for our info session. I'm looking at the time, it's already 11:25. So ayaw naman natin umabot ng lagpas lunchtime, by lunchtime. So you want to end a little early. So we'll go through the takeaway points. Ang takeaway points nandito is, how do we operationalize yung mga pinagsasabi ni Sir Buboy, Sir Ray na compliance activities na kailangan gawin? How do we do this? Kasi often, having attended other awareness sessions conducted by firms, law firms, na often at the end of it, ang tanong lagi ng mga tao, sige, alam ko na yan, so anong gagawin ko? What do I do? How do I comply? Often, na miss nila na, okay, so anong kailangan ko gawin ngayon? What's that actionable item that I can do at the end of this half-day session, mamayang hapon, that I can start doing now? So these are some of the things that we can. So as a public marker for data safety, when I say public marker, everyone knows, tayo mismo as individuals who give out our personal data day in, day out to all of these organizations, malamang, meron sa atin, pumili na sa mga online retail stores. Tama po ba? Siguro may mga iba na hindi pa, pero malamang since meron tayong social media, nagbigay na rin tayo ng personal data natin sa mga ganyang platforms. So we now have a reasonable expectation for these organizations to protect our data. Likewise, to the data subjects that our respective organizations are processing, they also have reasonable expectations to expect na meron tayong data protection measures natin. So according sa NPC, ito yan. So governance, we need to appoint a DPO. Kung wala pa tayong DPO, appoint a DPO. Kung meron na, find out kung kailangan mag-register. Register the DPO. Kung wala pa talagang DPO, hire a DPO. Right? So kailangan. Then, day-to-day. Ano yung day-to-day? Ito yung pagsulat natin ng mga policies natin, mga privacy notices natin, consent forms natin, that security measures that we want to implement, the information that we're processing, collecting. So dapat meron tayo yan. Especially for the HR professionals, consent form yung una natin kailangan gawin na kailangan embedded sa mga application forms natin. Kung online yung application form natin, dapat sa online meron. So it's having those forms already in place. Third parties, ito yung sabi natin kanina, outsourcing. If we're using an HRIS system provided by an external partner, so kamusta ba yung mga contracts natin with them? There are other HRIS providers na ang claim nila, they have access dun sa personal data entered by their clients. It begs the question, why? Para saan? I have nothing against the HRIS providers, but as a company that would get the services of these HRIS providers, the question is, bakit mo kailangan ng access sa employees ko? Para saan? Kung sasabihin nila for support and maintenance, din dapat triggered lang when a support or maintenance is required. Not perpetually na may access sila. So let's start creating data sharing agreements or social agreements, or infusing these agreements into the contracts, mga service level agreements natin with our providers. Tayo naman, kung tayo yung provider ng services, we now need to look into this. Kailangan meron din tayo niyan. Kasi pag wala tayo niyan, how can we say that we're compliant? We're complying. Clear po? So holistic approach to compliance. So sabi, we need to perform risk assessment. Ito yung PIA, for those who have attended several other DPI awareness sessions before. Ito yung privacy impact assessment. So it's an evaluation of the processes, activities that we do in our company that involve personal data. So when I say evaluation, we need to see ano ba yung mga risks na meron dyan. So that we can determine ano yung mga solutions that we can actually implement. In our experience, sa na-observe namin, some companies would rather jump into determining already yung mga, or implementing already yung mga security measures na gusto nila ma-implement. However, without necessarily going through the risk assessment process, the PIA process, yung implemented na security measure may not necessarily address the risks that we were not able to identify. Okay, so babalikan natin yung PA. Yes, you can jump into creating your consent forms, your data protection policies, your privacy notices, your manuals, privacy manuals. However, without properly identifying the risks involved, malamang yung mga makikita nating security measures are not necessarily, does not address the risks that we see. Or what's worse, magiging general siya. Motherhood statements. We will implement security measures, organizational, physical, technical, that does not necessarily specify. So ano nga, anong i-implement natin? Organizational, so organization rather. So as an organization, we need to have our privacy manuals. Ang privacy manual, kagaya ng operation manual, kagaya ng mga ISO standard manual, QMS manual, ISMS manual, hindi sila document na sinulat tapos itatago na lang sa drawer at kakalimutan na lang. Babalikan na lang sila pag kailangan ng re-accreditation or ng audit. Hindi po. These documents, especially the privacy manual, needs to be implemented day in, day out. Because our privacy manual contains all of the data protection policies that all of our employees need to implement. Nandiyan din yun pang HR. So if we have policies in place that we are not monitoring if it's implemented, diba? What I would like to say is, what I would phrase as a privacy manual that's not implemented and monitored is just a story. Hindi po siya manual. Diba? A privacy manual who's not implemented and monitored is just a story. It's a fictitious story. Diba? Parang it's just a book na under fiction kung hindi rin natin siya i-implement. So that's what we're saying. Implement that. Monitor that's being implemented. So under HR, I believe tayo sa HR professional, tayo sa HR mga profession rather, we would have better methods to monitor why or how our policies are being implemented by our employees. Clear po? And of course, data security. Ito yan. So implementing organizational, technical, physical security measures. Ayan na ngayon nakasulat eh. Pag kinapi-paste pa natin yan, nilagay natin yan sa manual at sabi natin yan lang gagawin natin, kulang talaga siya. Kasi it begs the question, what are these organizational, technical, and physical security measures? And we will only be able to identify them if we go through the PIA, the Privacy Impact Assessment. So, si Kusain and LIHPH, we conducted, and we're continuously conducting workshops on the PIA. And when we do conduct Privacy Impact Assessment workshops, ito yung sinasabi natin. A Privacy Impact Assessment is a 4-phase compliance activity. First, we build yung DPS inventory, the list of process that we perform under the HR department that involves personal data. Then we do personal data flow analysis. Ano ba yung how do we process the information? From collection, disposal, all the way to retention, that. Kasi pag wala tayong yan, hindi natin alam kung ano yung mga risks na meron. Yun yung third. Kasi yung risks na identify natin would be in the personal data flow. And from the risks that we identify, we get to determine ano yung mga security measures that we will be implementing. Clear? I do hope that's clear. Sana. Clear po? Now, aside from doing the PIA, kunyari, nagawa nyo na yung PIA or alam nyo na kung ano yung mga security measures na kailangan natin gawin, one immediate security measure, especially sa HR, that we need to implement is part of the day-to-day natin. Ito yung implementing consent forms. Okay? Like I said, we collect information a huge wealth of information from individuals, personal and often sensitive. So, do you get consent? Diba? Ang consent, explicit po siya. Hindi siya implicit. Kailangan binibigay siya. Hindi siya opt-out. Hindi siya by default binibigay. Kailangan consciously, hindi the subject, applicant natin or whoever would say, yes po, pumapayag po ako na ibibigay ko sa inyo yung personal data ko para ma-process. It's not assumed. pressured, silent, unconscious. Okay? Clear po? Now, aside from the PIA workshop that Hussein and LHPH conducts, we have a workshop, a write shop, if you may, a workshop on drafting privacy documents towards the end of September. And part of that is consent forms. And how do we write consent forms? Ito yung a snippet or a high-level template that we can use. So a consent form needs to contain these. Ano ba yung personal data being processed? Okay? So para saan yung bawat data point na pinoprocess natin dyan? Kung name, bakit mo kailangan yung name? Kung number, bakit mo kailangan yung number? Kung email, bakit? Then, ano yung mga data protection measures na meron tayo dyan? Ano yung mga confidentiality natin meron? Yung rights and data subject. Yung contact details ng DPO. And of course, yung actual consent, yung acceptance and signature nung tao, ng data subject. Like I said, towards the end of September, we are conducting a workshop, Hussein and LHPH, on how to write consent forms, privacy notices, and HR-specific data protection policies. So if you're interested in that, tell LHPH, we will be sending you the registration link for that. That's toward the end of September. Clear po? So yan yung meron tayo sa part 2 ng maging workshop natin. Kasi after you do your PIA, or if you're already sure na, hindi, kailangan ko itong mga documents, at malamang, at the HR, ito yung isa mga kailangan natin documents. So, compliance is not a one-time activity. Like we mentioned, compliance is not a project. Being compliant is a fallacy. Sorry, that's what we espouse. We need to be complying to data protection regulations. It's our commitment to comply. So breaches happen and will happen. So our question is, what do we do when they do? What do we implement when breaches do happen? How can we prevent? What do we do for when they do happen? How can we mitigate them from happening again? 8 pala. Hindi pala 7. Manage HR. I mentioned kanina yung DPO career. So HR needs to be able to provide the sufficient training to the DPO, the compliance team, and to the rest of the organization. Diba? When for them to equip themselves with the right tools, so kailangan yan. So manage HR siya. Continuity, mentioned. Regular risk assessment. Yung mga security measures natin na ginawa natin ngayon, who's to say na 1 month later, 3 months later, 6 months later, they're still effective. Like I said, the processes that we had back in 2019 are no longer effective now. Chances are, nag-digital na tayo, palitan tayo ng process, nag-update tayo ng process, kasi nawala yung face-to-face, basically. So we need to continuously review our policies, our processes. We need to continuously update our employees, continuously perform awareness sessions with our employees. Like I said, what we're doing now is just a simple info session on the data privacy of HR. If you want, for your organizations, if you want us to conduct data privacy awareness sessions specific to your organizations, do tell us, we can conduct that for you. For free. I-add ko lang, it's free. So privacy ecosystem. So now more than ever, diba? Nagkakaroon ng mga changes on technology, standards, threats. I mentioned earlier, mas nagiging creative ang magnanakaw, especially during a pandemic, during confusion, wherein people are lost. Diyan susceptible yung mga tao. Malamang, nakakatanggap tayo ng mga SMS messages na, oh, you won 100,000, you want free Netflix subscription, ano ba? Yung pa sa load scam, makakatanggap tayo ng your Netflix subscription has been compromised. Please send us a 6-digit code that we'll be sending you after this message. And then makakakuha tayo ng code. Tapos tayo naman, not knowing, just pabalo na natin. So marami na pong naging victim yan. So it always begs the question, vigilance on our end as data subjects, as individuals. Also, vigilance as processors of the individuals, as controllers of the individuals. Okay? So if you want a more thorough data privacy awareness sessions for your employees, do tell us. So we can discuss the logistics of that, so we can conduct that for free for your organization. Clear po? Yan. Lastly, for your data privacy compliance in this digital environment ulit, which path will you choose? If you notice, yung colors na to, they're not arbitrary or random. They pertain to the levels of organizational compliance we mentioned earlier. Clear po? Sige. With that, just to briefly explain, sino ba si Cossaint tsaka LHPH? So Learning Innovation Hub is a firm that provides learning technology solutions sa Philippines and Vietnam. So our mission is to help micro, small, medium enterprises build competencies, build the organizational effectiveness through quality in learning and innovative technical solutions. So sa training, development ng tao. Kasi naman is a GRC firm, governance, risk and compliance company, and part of that is data privacy compliance. And we believe that yung multidisciplinary and holistic approach sa compliance dapat natin sa data privacy. Hindi pwedeng technology aspect lang, technical aspect lang. Hindi pwedeng legal aspect lang, document submission lang. Hindi. At the end of the day, it's the implementation of these policies, the implementation of these softwares ang kailangan. If we only look at data privacy as a legal obligation, it's not operationalized. So sino tatamaan pa rin ng breach? Sino magiging target ng scam? Sino magiging target ng ransomware? It's not the people who wrote the documents. It's not the DPO. It's not the management team. Kasi malamang heighten yung insight nila on security. But the target in the company is the weakest link. It's the employee who does not know any better, who does not implement data protection measures, who does not know the data protection measures of the company. So at the end of the day, it's operationalizing the compliance. So it's not a legal obligation. Okay? So I do hope we get to elevate our consciousness with data privacy compliance, that it's not only a legal obligation. It's not only a technical aspect or technology aspect that we need to have antivirus, firewalls, the ISMS standards. No, it's the implementation of all of these. It's the people and the process that perform, use, collect, store personal data. That matters. So it's them that we need to monitor. Clear po? So Cossaint helps organizations empower, diba? By building a culture of security and privacy, and lahat ng mga compliance projects ni Cossaint sa mga companies with the HPH are tailored to the requirements of the company. Clear po? So ito na yung mga naging client engagements natin sa Cossaint and LHPH. Yung mga nag-attend before ng mga workshops, info sessions, tsaka yung mga na-consult na ni Cossaint. Online retail, government, shared service, HMO, pharma, maritime, financial institutions, IT. Yeah. With that, ito yung if you're interested to contact us. And like I said, towards the end of September, we have another workshop on crafting data privacy documents. And part of that, yung pinakita ko kanina, yung consent form, we'll dive into that in detail na on an application recruitment standpoint, ano ba dapat ang isang consent form. So kasama na rin dun yung privacy notice and then yung HR-specific data protection measures, data protection policies that the HR department can easily implement already. So the workshop is on September 21 and 23. So if you're interested, do contact any of the email here, si LHP or Cossaint. And if you have not yet done so, you can follow us in our social media platforms. With that, Any questions po? Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. Jean. Show of thumbs up dun sa mga wala nang tanong at naiintindihan naman lahat mga pinagsabi natin. Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else? Thank you. Yes. 6, 7, 8. Thank you, Sir Ron. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. Sino pa? Anyone else? Thank you. Thank you very much for your time. With that, Smiles.
Right. Thank you, Sir Ernest, for an informative class and for the great presentation. It was a pleasure to have you with us. And thank you, everyone, for attending this info session. If you have concerns, queries, or need clarifications, please don't hesitate to send us an email. Recorded video of our info session is up via Facebook and YouTube. Soft copy of certificates will be sent to your email within the day. Please patiently wait for your e-certificate to be sent. For those who attended via Facebook live streaming, kindly send us an email for the instruction. So this concludes our info session today. We hope you have learned and enjoyed it. Thank you. Stay safe.